Good evening. I would like to call to order the meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education. It is Tuesday, January 4th, 2022, and we are meeting in a hybrid format with some of us here at Casco Bay High School and others joining us remotely via Zoom. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo?
Présente.
Mr. Bork?
Here.
Ms. Russell Better?
Here.
Ms. Biliou? Mr. Youssef?
Here.
Ms. Aswami? Mr. McLaughlin? Mr. Alzamili?
Here.
Ms. Santiago?
Here.
Ms. Diu?
Present.
And Chair Figdor.
Here. I wanted to note that Ms. Bondo is joining us remotely as she is traveling and joining us in a beautiful attire today. And Ms. Biliou and Ms. Aslami are under the weather, so won't be joining us tonight.
And Ms. Santiago is also remote.
And Ms. Santiago, thank you, is also remote. With that, let's please everyone stand up and join me for the pledge. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Portland Public Schools recognizes the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand, the Wolastoqiyik, or Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, collectively known as the Wabanaki Confederacy, or People of the Dawnland. We are honored to have Wabanaki children among our students today, and as a district, we are committed to making the past, present, and future of Wabanaki peoples visible in our schools and classrooms. So with that, we are going to start, as is customary, with a public comment, an opportunity for the public to speak with us on any issue that is not on tonight's agenda, and specifically any issue that we're not voting on tonight. So if you're a member of the public and you want to address the board, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. I don't see any hands. I'm going to give everyone a moment. Okay, I don't see any hands, so I'm going to close public comment and move to the report of the chair. I first wanted to wish everyone a happy new year, a happy 2022. I am optimistic about the coming year because of all of you and our school community. So I look forward to a better 2022 with all of you. I know, despite that, right now we are entering a highly uncertain time with Omicron. And I want to reassure the board and the community of the following. So first, we're going to do all we can to keep schools open and our students learning in person. The American Academy of Pediatrics recently declared a national state of emergency in children's mental health, stemming from the isolation and disruption of the pandemic. We know that Portland kids need to be in our school buildings, and we'll do everything we can to keep them there. Second, we'll faithfully follow the science as the pandemic continues to change and evolve. Throughout the pandemic, we've acted based on the directives and recommendations of federal and state health and education authorities and the district's medical team, and we will continue to follow the science for the duration of the pandemic. And third, we'll continue our strategy of laying precautions to keep our students, staff, and community safe. Vaccinations, masking, ventilation, distancing, and more. While I was relieved that the Portland City Council last night voted unanimously to pass a mask mandate for public spaces and businesses, I personally was disappointed that they did not follow our successful strategy of layering precautions and allowed an exemption from the mask mandate for businesses that allow only vaccinated patrons. As the city's top health official testified last night, we know that layering precautions and using every tool available to us is needed to reduce transmission and keep our community safe. The city's new policy does not apply to the schools, however, and we will continue with our layered approach. Moving on from the pandemic, I want to announce my appointments for our committees for the first half of the year. I intended to do this at our last meeting. While school board members here tonight and with us remotely know which committees they are on, we have not yet announced the appointments publicly. So, and that was just my oversight at the last minute. So I apologize at the last meeting. So I apologize for that. So first is our Finance, Personnel, and Operations Committee, and Board Member Bork is going to chair that committee for us, with Mr. Youssef and myself joining as committee members. And our second committee is the Policy and Curriculum Committee, and Board Member Russell Better will chair that committee, with Ms. Bondo and Ms. Biliou as the committee members. So that wraps up my comments for tonight. And with that, I'm going to turn to the superintendent for his report. Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that everyone had a peaceful and restorative winter break. We now head into the second part of the school year, and I'm sure all of you, I am hopeful that this will be the last time we enter a calendar year in the throes of a pandemic. More on that later. Right before the break, we had our first snow day. Really, it was an ice day on December 22nd. As you may recall, we have said that the first three such instances would be traditional inclement weather days and be made up at the end of the school year. This one pushes our last day for the 21-22 school year for students to Friday, June 10th, and the last day, not for seniors, Emily. You guys are done. And the last day for school year staff to Monday, June 13th. I would like to remind everyone that the plan after the first three traditional inclement weather days is that if we have sufficient advance notice, we will have remote learning days instead of snow days. And those remote days will require student and staff attendance and will not need to be made up at the end of the year. On behalf of the Portland Public Schools, I would like to extend heartfelt condolences to the family of Bridget Malia, mother of retired Riverton School principal, now Talbot School, Jeannie Malia, who passed away over the break after a long and productive life. Miss Malia was a long-time educator in urban school settings, and it was that experience that inspired her own Jeannie to take on the work that she did so successfully over her career, including here in Portland Public Schools. Next, I'm pleased to be able to introduce our new pre-K director, Alyssa Bork. Alyssa comes to us with significant experience as a principal and pre-K director across the Northeast, most recently as principal of the neighborhood schoolhouse in Brattleboro, Vermont. In addition to her experience as a principal and teacher, she has significant knowledge of startup programming, which will be a strong match to our needs as we continue our program expansion. Alyssa recently relocated to Maine with her family, and we are grateful to have her join our team. Alyssa, would you care to say anything by way of introduction?
I would. Thanks very much. I'm thrilled to be here in this position. I'm very excited to be able to serve the children and families of Portland Public Schools. I want to thank everyone for the opportunity. I'm particularly excited the position offers the opportunity to create a truly equitable system of learning for pre-kindergarten students, which, as many of you know, is still rare nationwide. So thank you once again. I'm very excited to join Portland Public Schools.
And we're very excited to have you. I know that Malia is very, very excited to have you start, and very much looking forward as a team to seeing you join us and be a part of our strong efforts to expand pre-kindergarten.
Thanks.
Just before the break, Tony Cipollone, President and CEO of the John T. Gorman Foundation, announced his retirement this coming February. Tony has been a great friend to the district and a strong supporter of our equity work. His vision seeded our diversity, equity, and inclusion director role for 2 years, allowing us to build the case for what was last year's transition to general funds. Tony was one of the first people I met here in Portland, and over the years, he's been a friend and thought partner time and again. I wish him the best as he takes on this next phase of his life. I would like to welcome the new CEO of the Gorman Foundation, who, while new to the role, is neither new to the foundation nor to PPS. Nicole Witherby will become the foundation's second CEO upon Tony's retirement. Nicole is the parent of current PPS students and graduates, as well as a committed supporter of the foundation's equity priorities. I look forward to working with her as she continues the visionary leadership of the Gorman Foundation on Maine education. The Portland City Council voted last night to repeal Portland's state of emergency. As a result, the emergency wage that went into effect on January 1st is scheduled to end at midnight on January 13th. The timing of these changes creates operational challenges for the school district's payroll department, which is currently short-staffed at a time when year-end processing deadlines are looming. The initial move to the emergency wage on January 1st occurred in the middle of a biweekly pay cycle. As a result, more than 200 employees who are affected by this move to the emergency wage will need to be manually adjusted to $19.50 for half the pay cycle. The emergency wage cycle is then scheduled to end in the middle of a work week. This would result in a second pay cycle requiring manual adjustments for each affected employee. In order to avoid the impact of manual adjustments on a second biweekly pay cycle, we will be paying the emergency wage for the full pay period from January 9th through January 22nd. So from January 1st through the 8th, and then from the 9th through the 22nd. By extending the emergency wage through the end of the pay period, our payroll department can simplify the wage adjustment for all affected employees using a one-step batch process. We estimate that the cost for 7 days of additional emergency wages for this group of employees from January 13th through January 21st is approximately $15,000. Next, I would like to share information about a recent request we filed with the State Board of Education for a waiver of Rule 61 to waive the filing deadline and related requirements in order to allow Portland High School and Portland Arts and Technology High School paths and also Casca Bay to be rated for purposes of the 2017 Integrated Consolidated Secondary and Post-Secondary Facilities Final Priority List, so the ICSP priority list, and thus be considered for placement on that list. When we submitted our original applications to the major capital priority list, we included both Portland High School and the Paths Casco Bay High School sites because our 2017 facilities analysis rated both of those buildings as the most in need of major repairs. In fact, at the time of the analysis, both buildings were projected to need upwards of $20 million in repairs and updates over the next 20 years. We understood at that time, consistent with established DOE practice, if we were selected for a project, either of them, there would be an opportunity to consider a consolidation of facilities. PHS was the highest rated regular education secondary school on the 2017-2018 Major Capital School Construction Final Priority List. They were 15th on that list. Incidentally, Paths was the third highest rated high school on the list and the second highest career and technical facility. The high rating of both projects showed the tremendous need for improving our high school facilities in Portland. Unfortunately, as the years have ticked by, it appears increasingly unlikely that the current project list will ever get to number 15. Portland has shown a commitment to improving its school facilities. As this board knows, the Buildings for Our Future bond, approved overwhelmingly by Portland voters in 2017, is enabling us to renovate 4 elementary facilities up to that higher standard. We have been able to secure significant capital improvement funding through the city over the past 4 years, and we're grateful for this, but it is unrealistic to expect that we will be able to meet the up to $60 million in high school upkeep and updating required over the next 15 years for our 3 facilities. It was with this knowledge that I approached our legal counsel to explore viable options for achieving a state-funded project to secure funding for a 21st century high school facility. Working with Bill Stockmeyer and his colleagues at Drummond Woodsum, we developed a legal pathway to pursuing state funding to allow us to do that. So our request is to move our proposed project from the major school construction list to the integrated, consolidated secondary and post-secondary facilities list. The ICSP list currently has no viable projects approved that are in waiting. In fact, no schools have ever been approved through this process. The linchpin of the ICSP is that it requires the consolidation of more than a single facility. It requires the integration of career and technical education, and it requires a robust post-secondary component. I believe that we are ideally situated to deliver such a project by bringing together in one site our existing career and technical programming, our comprehensive high schools, and adult education programming. We have the makings of a model 21st century community secondary and post-secondary school. If our waiver request is approved, there would be significant work ahead of us. Bringing together the diverse interests that would need to coalesce to make this project possible would not be an insignificant undertaking. But since I've been in Portland, there has been a low rumble about consolidating high schools. Those who remember the Enrollment and Facilities Commission in 2018-19 will recall that we found both of our comprehensive high schools to be significantly underutilized, but it was not viable to bring both Deering and Portland into a single one of the current facilities. And even doing so would require huge investments in local funding to support the infrastructure improvements that each of those facilities needs. And we wouldn't begin to offer the added opportunities that a modern integrated career and technical facility would provide. So it's in the service of a vision of cutting-edge secondary and post-secondary education for this cutting-edge city that we advance this request first to the Maine DOE and subsequently to the State Board of Education. The board's construction committee is scheduled to take up this matter on January 28th, and at that time, they will decide whether to bring this request to the full Board of Education at their February meeting. From my perspective, we have nothing to lose for making this proposal. If the proposal is approved, we will need to engage in a sustained conversation as a community about what this would require from us. This is an overdue conversation, and even if we were not approved, it would set a course for our next proposal to the state for major construction projects down the road. I would like to acknowledge the folks who have helped to shape this proposal. In addition to our legal counsel, I would like to acknowledge Councilor Pius Ali for helping to start a conversation with state officials about integrating adult and career technical education together. I would also like to acknowledge State Representative Michael Brennan, who has been a thought partner in understanding the history of this conversation and the lay of the land in the state school construction landscape. I expect that we will be having conversations related to this topic over the coming months, and I look forward to your insights and your questions. Next, I would like to begin our school reopening update. As we've been doing for the past year, we provide a comprehensive update on our school reopening plans at board meetings. Today, we're going to start by updating you on case counts. During our shortened week prior to the break, we had 14 cases. Those cases resulted in 24 quarantines. And between the holidays yesterday and today, we've had upwards of 170 cases. So it's clear that the prevalence of COVID shows no signs of abating anytime soon. Consistent with what Chair Figdor said earlier, we will continue to look at our case counts, our staffing levels, and make decisions about continuity of instruction based on those data points. As we discussed at the last meeting, we have protocols in place for when a classroom or a school are required to go remote for a time. As you know, we were given a new set of standard operating procedures last Thursday. Because these protocols were dropped in the middle of the break, we were not able to fully understand them and figure out how to implement them. As a result, on Friday, we sent a message to staff and families letting them know that we would return to school with the existing protocols in place and that we would endeavor to update those protocols as soon as possible upon returning to school. I recognize this was frustrating to some, particularly as they may have been reading media reports and getting information through others, including their own doctors, about the change in the quarantine period. We made a decision to hold in place so that we would be able to understand what was changed, understand how best to apply it to our situation, and communicate it as effectively as possible. So yesterday afternoon, superintendents and nurses were briefed by DOE staff. Later, Assistant Superintendent Aaron Townsend and I met with our medical team, Nurse Coordinator Tina Valiu, and Dr. Gita Rao to develop preliminary recommendations. Today, our medical team met with the rest of our school nurses, and Mr. Townsend met with our contractual health and safety committee. The key issues I want to update you on today regarding the changes in the guidance are three. One is changes to contact tracing and notification. Two, changes to the required quarantine period. And three, defining when individuals can come back to Portland Public Schools, including whether we will accept home administered tests and when we would consider symptoms to be resolving. Additionally, as part of my update, I will talk about vaccination and testing plans as well as masks. So let me start with sharing the frame that we brought to reviewing the guidance changes. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we've tried to lead with a solid understanding of the scientific knowledge. To that end, we have deferred to our medical experts, and we've asked them to ground in the public health knowledge and guidance. In fact, our school reopening plan is approved by the board and is enshrined in our MOU with our collective bargaining units, commits us to following CDC guidance. We also recognize the impact that decisions have on the operations of our schools. So we look at it very carefully, and it has required at times doing things that make sense, even if they're hard to do. And that has been and will continue to be one of our guiding principles. We've also stated a clear preference for having students in school as much as possible, as long as we can keep them and our staff safe. We've learned through this pandemic that our nurses play a critical role in maintaining our schools open and keeping our students and staff safe. Increasingly, we have seen the challenges they face day to day, and in addition to providing as much additional help as we can to them, we've tried to shape our policies and practices to enable them to do what is most value added as we have learned more about what that is. So we brought this orientation or these principles to our thinking about those changes in the CDC guidance, and here's where we plan to go. So first, regarding exceptions to quarantine. The new DOE guidance provides that in schools that have a universal mask mandate, students who are in contact with a positive case do not have to quarantine. Until now, that was true if the student was vaccinated or participated in pool testing. We're planning to fully avail ourselves of this new exception to the quarantine requirements. This has significant implications for our school nurses in that it simplifies contact tracing significantly. Because this exception technically applies only to school attendance, we will continue to communicate with families of students who were exposed to a positive case, but we will do it more generically. Specifically, we will communicate with the student's homeroom class at the elementary school level. We will communicate with the house at the middle school level. Our decision here is grounded in the fact that our experience over the past year is that very few students who are considered close contacts and required to quarantine actually contract COVID. As we reported before the holiday, that number was less than 1%. This is not our experience alone. Dr. Gita shared with us that New York City Schools reports a similar experience. Because at the elementary and middle school level, we're doing systematic testing through our pooled testing program, we are confident that we will continue to identify and isolate other positive cases. This gives us confidence that we can make this significant step. At the high school level, where we currently don't have systematic pool testing in place, we will continue to identify students who were in the class where the positive case was present and communicate with staff, students, and families who were in those classes. Again, in every one of those communications, because we have systematic masking in place, nobody needs to quarantine and not attend school. However, at this time, we are required to do this level of contact tracing because those individuals should, by CDC rules, quarantine in the community. We will be changing our communication protocols with school communities about cases and will no longer send the school-wide letters that have become routine. Instead, we will focus on communicating only with those affected as described above, and we will continue our weekly summary that will include the number of cases by school and will serve as our community communication. Next, regarding the quarantine period. The new CDC guidance reduces the quarantine period from 10 days to 5 days. We are also adopting this. Effective Monday, we will no longer require a 10-day quarantine for positive cases. After Monday, anyone who has quarantined for 5 days and whose symptoms are resolving will be allowed to return to the Portland Public Schools. Resolving is, by definition, a subjective term. In our practice, we have used 24 hours without a fever and improvement in other symptoms, for example, an occasional cough and some sneezing or runny nose as the standard. This subjectivity is where freeing our nurses up is so critical. If we want to maximize the learning opportunities for students and reduce the need of our staff to not be at work, we need the medical experts, our nurses, freed up from looking at who was sitting next to who, and instead bringing their knowledge and expertise to this kind of management. Related to this, the new guidance affords us the option of accepting home-administered tests. We're planning to also take advantage of this new provision. Starting Monday, if someone can provide evidence to our nurses of 2 negative tests with at least 24 hours between the tests, even if they're still symptomatic, as long as those symptoms are resolving, we'll allow them to return to the Portland Public Schools. Let's be clear, this is not to allow someone who previously tested positive to come back before the 5-day quarantine period. This is to prevent someone who is symptomatic but cannot get a test appointment from having to sit out the quarantine period, assuming that they're positive when they may not be. Again, this takes our nursing staff's time and bandwidth, but we believe, most importantly, our medical team believes that this is where they should be spending their time. Dr. Gita explains that the key point here is that almost 2 years into the pandemic, we have a finer level of understanding of what works to prevent COVID. Vaccines, testing, and masking are the highest value added. Providing our nurses with the time to redirect their time away from the burdensome contact tracing will allow them to focus on case management, as explained earlier. It would also increase their capacity to educate and promote testing, participation, and vaccinations. So what we will be communicating to our community is the following. Beginning on Monday, close contacts to cases in schools will not be required to quarantine due to our universal masking policy. 2, starting Monday, individuals who test positive will only need to quarantine for 5 days, provided that their symptoms are resolving. And also beginning on Monday, symptomatic individuals who can provide evidence that they've tested negative on 2 home-administered tests with at least 24 hours between those tests will be allowed to come back to the Portland Public Schools. Before we left for break, we announced that we would be providing an incentive for staff to get their booster shots. Our HR department is working on developing the parameters in collaboration with our collective bargaining units, and we'll be communicating about the program in the next few days. But the essence of it is simple. Like we did with our original incentive to be vaccinated, any Portland Public Schools staff member who provides visual proof to their supervisor that they have received their first booster shot will receive another $100. As I mentioned earlier, vaccines are the most value-added mitigation strategy. We've done good work to date to provide on-site vaccinations and ongoing updates about community-based vaccination opportunities. We need to continue these efforts. Our nurse coordinator will continue to work with Northern Lights, and our individual nurses will continue to leverage their resources and contacts to expand clinics in our schools to the extent possible. As you may have seen, the Maine OSHA issued rules yesterday requiring public entities, of which we are one, to implement a vaccine mandate or weekly testing for non-vaccinated staff. Effective next week, we will expect our relatively few non-vaccinated staff to participate in our weekly pooled testing. We're working through the details of communicating with those individuals and determining exactly where they should be tested, but we expect to be in compliance with the OSHA requirement on schedule. Staying with testing, we're currently in the process of providing pool testing at the high school for our student athletes and other co-curricular participants. That testing is scheduled to start next week. We're looking to scale up pool testing to all of our high schools. And as you heard earlier, we're still obligated to do fairly laborious contact tracing at the high school level because we're unable to rely on the bulk of our students testing regularly. Based on a request by our nursing staff, we will be posting 3 ESSER-funded additional med tech positions this week, and those resources are what is needed to give our high school staff the capacity to substantially expand testing at the high school level. We will continue to look for other avenues for additional testing, including looking to purchase at-home tests and go beyond the antigen testing that is supplied to us by the state. But I think it's important for everyone to understand that these tests are hard to come by. The reason the state limits our supplies is because they're not able to stock them. So I want to make sure that everyone understands that we're subject to the supply chain challenges that we have all experienced throughout the pandemic. A key mitigation measure that we've used, the last of the 3, is the use of masks. While there's no definitive research to date, upgrading the quality of masks appears to be growing in popularity as a means to control transmission of the virus. Last week, Dr. Shaw mused about the value added of surgical grade masks. We are told that the CDC may consider making a stronger recommendation to that effect. If so, as we've tried to do throughout, we will incorporate that into our protocols. But I also want everyone to know where we stand right now in terms of access to high-grade masks. Last year, we purchased N95 respirators for all of our staff. Because the legal and appropriate use of N95 requires a significant amount of work to be approved and to have them fitted, few of our staff have taken advantage of this offer. We're again making those masks available to staff. We also have approximately 15,000 KN95 masks currently in hand, and we'll continue to stock those so that any staff member who wants to upgrade to that level of mask can do so without concern. We currently have a large supply of surgical masks for both staff and students, so there's no reason why anyone who wants to upgrade from cloth masks to this level of masking can't do so now with the supplies that we have on hand. We will be reminding our administrators of the process for securing those from our warehouse. It's clear that we've entered yet another phase of the pandemic. For close to 2 years, we've overcome significant challenges by working together. We've led with deference for medical expertise, a commitment to safety, and an understanding of the value of our schools as an anchor institution in our community. Let's continue to do that in this new year. I'm confident that if we do, we will continue to provide for the needs of our students, family, and staff. And that concludes my report.
Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent. Thank you for your very comprehensive report today. Very much appreciate all the information. I know the community and board do as well. What questions, or are there questions from the board? Board Member Bork.
Thank you, Chair. Processing a lot. Thank you, Superintendent. I presume, first of all, that communications will be going out on the COVID piece, and so the board should look for that, not special slides or bullet points or other things that would be uploaded to board docs later to continue processing these changes.
Not specific. I mean, our goal is to communicate all of this to the community by Friday. So our steps are talking to you today, sharing with our administrators and staff between now and Friday, and then putting out a formal communication as part of our scheduled, bi-weekly staff and community newsletter on Friday.
Okay. And then staying within the COVID protocols, can I tersely talk through a scenario with you so I can understand how this might affect people in real time? So if a family had an exposure over the break, so they don't qualify for the close contact exemption, right? Because it wasn't in school and they weren't masked. So first of all, that's not on the table, and that wouldn't be till Monday anyway. But they're testing negative and they have no symptoms. Come Monday, can they come to school, or are they still supposed to not be in school due to our previous quarantine protocol?
In that scenario where it happened over the holiday, they will have had 5 days
Right.
they will have had 5 days of quarantine. And again, if they're resolving, they would be able to come back to.
Okay, so families will understand this on Friday in more thorough detail. And
Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. I'll pause there. That was my first kind of trying to talk it through to understand how it applies, but I need to just state a little more.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Bork. Ms. Russell-Better, if you could wait 1 second, I'm going to call on Ms. Bondo first. Okay, great. Ms. Bondo, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you for the update. And can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you. So I'm totally agree with Board Bork. Then we really need to get everything to absorb those new informations. And just a few questions for clarification. Are we going to translate all those information to different languages?
Yes.
Okay. And for the close contact, if we don't have any more quarantine for the close contact, can we still require to be tested, or they just need to come back at school?
If under the changes that we're proposing, if somebody is
Right.
considered a close contact at school, because we have universal masking, they would not be required to test, and they would not be required they would not be required to quarantine. Those who participate in pool testing would be tested in the next cycle of testing. But otherwise, if they're symptomatic, we would obviously flag them. But if they were asymptomatic, we wouldn't.
Okay,
Aaron?
thank you.
Just one update to our current protocols for close contacts do not require testing. It's recommended. And that will be part of the continued message that, students and families in those classrooms get is they're recommended to be tested 5 to 7 days. And that's part of the encouragement of being in the pooled testing, because that will be an opportunity to be tested.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. So the other question is we know that we have the home testing really short supplies. It's been so challenging for most of the families. And I know we have a lot of families, low-income families, and some are really facing hardship to try to access those home testing. Because it may be one of the, I think with the new change, we can accept that for the comeback in the school. So if they cannot access those home testing and have those proof, then the symptoms has been resolved. So how can we clear them in our side?
So I think that part of the thinking behind accepting those home tests is that some people have more ready access to it than others, and that being able to accept that so it opens up additional capacity for us to be able to test those who don't have access to home tests, either directly in school or through our partnership with Greater Portland Health. So we actually, as we talked about this, thought this was helping to reduce barriers to testing, particularly for families that might not have insurance, not be able to access, at-home tests and things along those lines.
Okay, so families will be aware that we have knowledge about those options.
That's the point of communicating all of this on Friday. So, we obviously have a ton of stuff. Much of it that is being ironed out as we speak. As I indicated, we met with the Health and Safety Committee this afternoon. Our medical team met with the nurses this afternoon. So we're trying to get ourselves in a place where we'll be able to communicate this, effectively to our public. And that's why we sort of held from just saying yes, we're going to do all of this and then be running around not actually knowing what it all meant. So we are working towards doing that on Friday.
Okay. Thank you. I will post for now. It's a lot to absorb. Thank you so much. Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Ms. Russell-Better.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Superintendent, for all of the work. That just want to acknowledge for our staff, the never-ending pivoting and diligence that we kept thinking we'd have a break from, and it just hasn't ended. So I just, I want to acknowledge my own trepidation, and I'm sure others, sending kids to school yesterday and staff going to school, but also my incredible gratitude that I was able to send my kids and it felt a little better the next day, just kind of every time we've had to pivot, the anxiety and just kind of acknowledging that it's kind of another new normal. So I just feel really grateful for all the mitigation that's happening. And but just want to say that I'm thinking constantly of my own kids and family and community and staff, and wanting I'm just grateful to hear these other steps, and just had a few clarifying questions, and then just wanted to ask a little bit more about masks. So, Superintendent, I just wanted to make sure I understood about the plan of 2 negative tests 24 hours between. Was that in meaning for a student that had symptom from that is from something else, and so that they can return? Is that my understanding? Okay. Yeah. I was just trying to make sure I was understanding that was separate from, you were saying they don't have to test to return, right? That's right. So after the 5 days, there isn't a required test. but the symptoms, I understood that, it's subjective about the symptoms improving, but there isn't a required test, right?
That's right.
Okay. And so I just wanted to clarify. So would it be by family report versus, like, I understand the freeing up some of nurses' incredible workload from contact tracing. I mean, would it be kind of like wanting to see that student when they come in and checking on their symptoms? I mean, is that kind of part of the plan?
That's right.
Okay.
That's why it's so important for us to be able to free up their time
Okay.
to do case management, which right now, they oftentimes don't have time to do.
Okay. So then we would imagine a family would be feeling, that the symptoms were mild enough, like more mild cold-like. And so that student returning, the nurse would get to eyeball them. And okay, thank you.
And would have the ability to test them,
Okay.
if they needed to, if they had any doubt and they wanted to establish, that the student is clear to come back.
Okay. Thank you. So that would then be, and as you mentioned, families having the ability to do the testing at home also can free up our focusing on being able to test the students that aren't having access.
Right.
And that it's difficult to get the tests. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. Superintendent, I was interested about the N95 mask, which I wasn't aware. I was just curious and understand, because I had to be fitted for one for work, and that it is a process. If people wanted to, would it be our nursing staff that does? Because it is a process to do
we
the
have
fitting.
we have a contract.
Oh,
we have
okay.
a contract with an entity in town that that does the fitting for us.
And so, is it your understanding that it's just that hasn't? Because of the time and sort of effort to get that done, staff hasn't shown interest in doing. Very not much.
I think for the most part, and I know. Tina is here with us, and she might have additional insights. So jump in, Tina, if you do. But that's my general understanding. It's a incredible. You went through it, so it is.
Yeah.
There's like a 5-page form.
Yeah.
You've got to meet certain requirements. You have to then go and get fitted. It's not a one-time thing, so it's fairly involved.
Okay, and Tina, I'd love to hear your perspective. My one other question was I was just curious. If there was more interest, just even the purchasing, like if people wanted to do that, then that's going to be the investment of purchasing it, right? Because then would it be we're expecting those folks are going to want to have them? I'm just kind of trying.
We have 500 of them on hand.
Okay, yeah, I'd love, Tina, if you have any.
Right. No, the only thing I would add is that they're not that comfortable to wear.
I know.
6.5 hours and teaching, talking and teaching. That's a real.
Yeah.
They're difficult. So I think that's a barrier too. But we have
just the practicality. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So I guess my other question then about the KN95 mask, I'm curious because I think Superintendent, you mentioned that the plan would be to kind of communicate with administrators about the availability, because my sense is that, like a lot of things, that different buildings, different communities, have probably at some point communicated, right? I remember you sharing about K95s at one point, but I think we just weren't in that period of time. I wasn't wearing them or thinking about them. So I think it's just now that, Dr. Shaw has suggested, I've heard, more epidemiologists talking about, obviously N95 is the gold standard, but KN95 to me feels like a really reasonable, higher quality protection to reduce transmission. So I guess I'm just wondering aloud whether even just for this period of surge, is it possible for us to say as a district, we're providing these, a mask a day for staff? Is that something?
We've said that we have them available,
Yeah.
and anybody who wants to have them, we have 15,000 on hand right now.
I guess I'm just saying, I feel like that's maybe.
And we recognize, because we've all received the same emails that you've received from people, on staff saying that we need to re-communicate that to staff so that they know that they're available. And, the way we do that is through our principals to make sure that they know how to procure it, who to ask to have them delivered. And, again, we're able to do that. And we recognize that 15,000 is not enough if everybody is wearing,
Yeah.
KN95s, every day. So, we absolutely have the ability to procure more and will procure more.
Okay. So it is reasonable, say that is communicated and that a lot of staff did start requesting those. I mean, I'm just thinking, I don't know that this means for long period, but, does it feel like that's a reasonable, I don't know, budget wise, for us to say this winter?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. I just had no sense of, I was kind of just trying to guess like what the cost of that, but just for me to know that that's an option in the near future as we're dealing with this surge.
Right now it's available.
Thank you.
15,000 of them and we can get another
Okay.
15,000,
Wonderful. Okay. Yeah. And I'm just happy to hear the, putting the word, I mean, I just think too about all of the pivots, all of the, whatever that was communicated, even if it was a couple months ago, probably feels like a year ago, right? Because so much information. So I think if people are paying attention to, this is just another piece of, decreasing transmission. I think it's another great tool. So I appreciate that update and to know that's another tool in our box.
And I think you said it, that it's a new phase. This is a new thing and people may be more tuned in now than they were when we were saying, at the beginning of the year that we have 20 plus thousand, KN95s on hand and people were like, what's a KN95? I don't need that. I'm fine. I like my mask.
And I think I've just heard staff saying they've been purchasing them themselves. Maybe they just didn't know that this was, or had forgotten or wasn't. So to know that that's available and that we're communicating that's wonderful.
Ms. Russell-Better, may I interrupt you for a moment and go to Ms. Santiago? She is needing to leave, but has
absolutely.
She has another commitment, but she has a question for
go ahead.
The superintendent. So Ms. Santiago, please go ahead.
Thank
you, Ms. Russell-Better.
I just wanted to bring in this scenario. So a couple weeks ago in my ceramics class, there was a student who was having symptoms and she wanted to get a test. So she went to the nurse's office and they were able to do that really quick. I assumed it was like an at-home test. Is that still an option available for students?
Tina, do you want to answer that? I think the answer is yes. In most instances, if we have the supplies and it's a symptomatic situation, that's, I think, the standard protocol. But Tina, help me out.
Yes, you're right. We can, but we really want to be a little bit careful. We don't want people coming to school with symptoms to be tested. And part of that is our supply. And part of it is we don't want sick kids in school, or anybody sick in school. But if you're at school and you develop symptoms, yes, you can see the nurse. And if it's appropriate, a rapid test can be done.
Thank you. That was my question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ms. Santiago. Okay, back to you, Ms. Russell-Better.
Thank you. And I was glad to hear your question, Ms. Santiago. So Superintendent, also just about masks for students, I get the sense that those are plentiful, the medical masks, right? The surgical masks. So I just for my understanding, is it sort of just as needed that staff have them, whether students don't have one when in the bus, students would have to have them, but like out of the car, or if they have a soiled one, is it sort of just they're really available for as needed?
Yep.
Okay. So that's not an issue of access for surgical masks. I just, I wasn't clear if that was just like in buildings, but it sounds like that's not a issue. Okay. My last question is just about mealtime. And I know, I just want to understand, because I get the sense it's got to be, even if there was a desire to have students maybe eating in classrooms, that staffing has got to be an issue about that. Is that a piece of whether?
I think that varies from building to building, situation to situation. But, we have lots of cases where kids are eating in their classrooms. So it does happen. It depends on.
So is that district-wide an attempt to try to do that when possible to reduce the number of unmasked students during meal? Is that, or is it kind of just?
In some cases that may reduce it. In some cases it would increase it. So I think, we've also said, which is again easier to do in the spring and in the fall, that eating outside and all of those things. So, we try to ensure that we have at least 3 feet of distance between students when they're eating. 6 feet is ideal, but we strive and do reasonably well at getting to those 3 feet.
Okay. I guess my last question on that, for if Tina is able to answer just the perspective of, with Omicron, is there enough information at this point that there are already different recommendations regarding mealtime? I mean, I know it's all so new, but I haven't seen that the CDC said anything different.
Tina, and I think Dr. Gita is also with us, I think. So either one of you, if you.
I would just say quickly, this was discussed at length at the nurses' state meeting yesterday, and there are, no recommendations to do anything different from the protocols we're using at lunch. And that, with universal masking, that recommendation, it's understood that we won't have our masks on when we eat. Yep. So, I don't know if Dr. Gita wants to add anything.
I don't. I think we're following the CDC guidance on this for their best understanding of the risk of transmission during lunch. Nothing further.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Russell-Better. Ms. Dio.
Hi. When you say that it has to be 2 home administered tests that are negative, what about a doctor administered? Is it 2 in 24 hours apart with that too?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that. Tina,
No, I would say it may depend on if symptoms are resolving and the type of test done. So I would say not necessarily if you get it done at a doctor's office or pharmacy, but it would depend on the specific circumstances.
Okay. And that's why it's important for us to be able to free up our nurses to be able to do that level of, asking follow-up questions, checking people and doing things like that.
Mr. Youssef.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. My question is about purchasing home testing. Is it different than the plan that we already have?
Purchasing additional testing?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't currently purchase any of our testing. Our pool testing is provided to us by the state. The Binax testing that we currently do is also a part of the state contract. So it is, an extension of pool testing to do that. We will look to expand our testing supply so that we can more liberally administer tests. We're constrained right now by the number of tests that are available. The state is constrained by the number of tests that are available. So I know that in our conversation with our Health and Safety Committee today, that was one of their requests, was for us to do everything that we can to expand our access to, antigen testing. We went down the road, if you recall, early in the fall of trying to do, a contract for somebody to do PCR testing, and we weren't able to get that to happen. So now that, antigen testing is more readily available, we're looking to, expand our access to that. But again, it's not something that you can just say, I would like 30,000 tests delivered tomorrow and have them in our, delivered.
Oh, thank you. About this stuff, you said we will be compliant with either weekly test or vaccination, and that's gonna start when?
It'll start next Wednesday is the deadline that OSHA laid out. So that's our goal, to have that in place. We currently have the ability to do it in most of our facilities because we're doing pool testing in those facilities now that we're actually next week starting the athletic testing at the high school. So we'll just be able to fold in any staff. We will require those staff who are not vaccinated, as part of their weekly responsibilities to go and get tested. So we're able to do that starting next week. And then there's a handful of places, like central office where, where we don't currently, because we don't have students, we're not doing testing. So we're working through how to operationalize that in those places.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Youssef. I have a couple questions, and then I'm going to see if did you have a question, Mr.
Yeah,
Bork?
you go first.
Okay.
Thanks.
My first question is with regard to communicating to families when there are close contacts, just so I understand. In elementary school, if there is a child, for instance, say there was a child in my daughter's 5th grade class who tested positive, then you would the school would send a communications to everyone in the class saying a child in your kid's class tested positive, and not to the full school, as had been the case. And then at the middle school level, that would be to the full house. And then high school, not a lot is changing because we're not doing the pool testing.
Well,
go ahead.
No, at the high school, we would, track the student's schedule. So, at elementary, it's easier because it's just the one class, right? At the high school, depending on our schools, we would have to go through and say, what's their period 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? And messages would go to those periods.
Got it.
But it won't be like what's particularly onerous right now is, who was there?
Yes.
Who wasn't there?
Yes.
Did they move around? Did they sit in their assigned seats? All of those kinds of things. We won't do that. We'll blanket notify everyone that was in those classes.
Absolutely. That seems very appropriate to me. My second question is with respect to the beginning testing athletes and others involved in extracurriculars at the high school level. And is that for all high school athletes, or is it for unvaccinated high school athletes?
I think it's for all high school athletes.
Well, it's required for unvaccinated high school athletes. And again, we implemented this before some of these changes, right? Because we didn't want them to have an exposure that then kept them out of regular academic programming. So it was required. So thus a student would either be in pool testing or vaccinated. So they would have a quarantine exemption, but it was available also, but not required for vaccinated athletes. So they could sign up, but they weren't required. Unvaccinated students to continue participating are required to sign up. Okay.
I do wonder about the communication there, because I do think it may have been received at least as an either or. And then in terms of actually how that happens, is it part of you go to practice and you do it as part of your school day?
At each school, because a lot of this is contingent on the the vendor staffing to be there to help facilitate and so forth. So each school has a schedule where it's a Wednesday morning. Okay. They need to come to a central location, at each of the schools to do their swabs. And then again, part of what we'll learn is then, how we're expecting right now then that they also have to report on Friday morning, just so we don't have to go chase folks down in case there needs to be the follow-up positive, if there's a positive pool and we have to do the follow-up Binax testing. Yeah. So each school is designated kind of a time and location that students who are participating need to gather.
Okay. Thank you so much. Those are my questions. Board Member Bork, did you have additional questions?
Yeah, I think I have my thoughts together now.
Please go ahead.
And I apologize in advance if some of this is redundant, but I'm trying not to be. Could more be said on what the nurse case management will look like? I'm particularly kind of wondering about the referral process. There's self-referred, a family calls in, and that would put them on the nurse's radar. Our teachers referring kids who are sniffling and sneezing. How does someone land in the nurse's cases to track to start off?
Tina, I don't know if you can answer that generically, or if it might be helpful to have some of the scenarios that Mr. Bork just outlined now, and any others that, either Mr. Bork or others can think of, but I don't know if you can just generically answer that.
Yeah, well, it's exactly what you just said, Mr. Bork. Families do often call the nurse and describe symptoms or ask for guidance, and we do a lot of referrals over the phone to our school site. Sometimes kids do come to school with symptoms, mild symptoms. Maybe the parent has called or the teacher notices or the nurse, sees them in the hall or whatever. So we would check them in the office and then contact the family if testing is appropriate or not. We might do that there in the office. We might, find out more information about the family or other things going on and do referrals that way. There's some community resources that sometimes can even do home visit testing and that kind of thing. So I guess it's all sorts of ways that the nurse gets involved.
Okay, that's helpful. Is there a protocol that teachers are following? Is it up to teachers' discretion for whether they refer a student to the nurse?
Well, I think I guess it is up to their discretion, but I think most staff are quite familiar with symptoms, which at this point are almost anything. So they know to call and send us and refer the student down to the nurse.
Okay, thank you.
I think in general, we've messaged that abundantly, that if, somebody is displaying any of those symptoms, that they should be referred.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks for all that you and the nurse team have been doing, the medical team have been doing, and I'm glad that you feel like your resources can better be aligned with meaningful impact instead of less meaningful impact. Superintendent, could you just kind of give me the Gantt chart of pooled testing in the sense of like who's getting it right now, who's about to get it, when, that sort of thing? I'm just lost in the implementation plan.
Right now at the elementary levels, kindergarten through fifth grade, everybody has access to it. I don't know what our exact count is, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 70, it's upwards of 75% of, students are signed up for it.
And pre-K is not included?
So that's where I need help.
Okay.
Where are we exactly with pre-K? We do it at the school level, but not yet at the partner sites.
Right. All of the in PPS building pre-Ks all have access. So at Rowe, at Presumpscot, you name it. But the partner sites, not yet. That's part of this next phase that we'll talk about.
So that's that at the middle school. Now everyone has access to it. It was originally just sixth grade. Back in November, we scaled that up to the full of middle school. And then at the high school, starting next week, the athletes and co-curricular participants will have access to it. And then we look to scale it up when we're able to staff up. We just had that conversation about what it would take. And so we need to try to find the people to be able to have the resources to do it for all high school students.
Yep. And then before the break, you said coming back this year, unvaccinated staff would be required to participate in pool testing. Has that beginning this week?
That begins next week.
Next week, I'm sorry. Okay. And thank you for walking me through that. And is the vendor staffing reliable at this point, or are we finding that we're missing some scheduled tests because of variability in their staffing or anything like that? No. Okay. So it's just about continuing to build that capacity. Thanks.
I mean, I think that in general, they've been reliable. They, have people out and, our nursing staff steps in and, or administrative staff steps in and takes on, additional pieces when that happens. But in general, I think that they've been, that what they said that they would deliver originally and what they actually were able to deliver wasn't quite the same. But once we started, they've been consistent in providing what they said that they would provide.
Okay. Thank you for those answers. And then did you talk about current existing staffing gaps and how if there's an impact, whether it's in transportation or BHPs and that sort of thing? Was that part of your update and I missed it?
I didn't update on that this time, no.
Okay. I will follow your lead on when we hear more about that. And lastly, I'll just say I'm really interested to track and hear updates later this month on the integrated school plan. So thanks for sharing about that tonight. Thank you for humoring or your patience with me getting through my questions.
Jody, go ahead.
I'm not really familiar with pool testing. Could you just tell me how often it is?
Yeah, it's weekly. So every week, it's called pool testing because we could be in a pool, we would all get swabbed, we'd put it in one vial, and it would they would test that whole vial. And if it came back as positive, we wouldn't know if it was you or if it was me or anybody else. So we would all have to be tested again individually by the nurse using the antigen test to determine that it was me that was the infected party.
Okay, very cool. Thank you.
Ms. Russell-Better.
Thank you, Chair. I just had one quick question that perhaps Tina could answer. I just was thinking about the pool testing and students returning after having been COVID positive. And I'm just wondering if we start to have students returning that were positive, will those students be in the pool? Are they going to show up as a positive? That's
they can
be infected now or not transmissible now?
Yes, once someone's positive, they should not be in pool testing for 90 days. They can trigger a positive, so they are taken out.
Okay, thank you. So there's already a protocol about that. So
yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Russell-Better. I actually had one final question. Sorry, Erin. I'm just wondering with the case count, Superintendent, that you reported at the start of your update, does that have any of our pools come back already?
No.
So that doesn't even include any of the pools that have
Right.
been
No,
done?
we're just starting to have some of the pools. They kind of trickle back in. So the Monday tests, there's a few that have started to come back. Certainly something we're concerned about.
Yeah.
And just, the numbers that'll come out of that. And, frankly, our capacity to test all the positive pools, so it'll be the next few days will be a challenge.
Okay. Thank you. I know we'll get the update on Friday. But I think that given that we're seeing this increase, not only in our schools, but in many places across the country of Omicron at this explosion of cases, I do think if we're seeing something truly off the charts in the next few days, if you can let the board know, so we understand the magnitude of what we're facing in our buildings, that would be much appreciated. Okay, with that, maybe I could just take the opportunity to thank Nurse Tina and Dr. Gita, as well as Mr. Townsend and the full team that is involved in managing our response to COVID. I know as Ms. Russell-Better indicated earlier that the constant pivoting is so much for all of our staff, but even more so for the team that is responding to the very latest scientific information, recommendations from health officials at the federal and state levels. So thank you so much for all of your efforts and for your diligence in keeping our school community safe. So with that, we are going to turn to the report of the Secretary, consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of our December 21st, 2021 meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's Mr. Youssef, seconded by Ms. Russell-Better. Are there any questions on the motion? Board Member Bork.
The meeting began at 6 p.m., correct?
Yes.
Okay, so friendly amendment to change the opening of the meeting time to 6 p.m.
Thank you. We will make that change. Seeing no other questions, let's move to public comment. Is there any public comment on our meeting minutes from our last meeting on December 21st, 2021? Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment, move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion on the meeting minutes? Seeing none, again, we'll make that friendly amendment, and we'll go ahead and approve these minutes. So by roll call vote, please indicate if you are in support of approving the meeting minutes from our December 21st, 2021 meeting. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Wando,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Ms. Dew,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes. So the meeting minutes are unanimously approved with our student voting with majority. Now we're moving on to consent items, and tonight we have a quarterly report from the Foundation for Portland Public Schools. Mr. Superintendent, would you like to introduce this agenda item?
I think I'm just going to turn it over to our amazing Executive Director, Andy Summers, to give you an update on the amazing work that the foundation has been doing.
Thank you, Superintendent Patana. I'm going to share my screen because I have a slide deck that is here. Let's see, is it? There we go. All right. Well, thank you all for having me. For those who don't know, the Foundation for Portland Public Schools, according to our Memorandum of Understanding with the district, presents our work to the school board publicly 4 times each year. So I wanted to start with just an update of our financials for the year. It's not quite half the year because I had to submit this slide deck, so it only went through the 29th of last week. But as of that time, we had raised $790,000 of grants and donations to benefit Portland Public Schools. And the pie chart shows the breakdown of those funds. And I would like to draw attention to the fact that $366,000 of that is Portland Empowered, which is now a project under the umbrella of the Foundation for Portland Public Schools. The second largest category is what we call the Addressing the Opportunity Gap Fund, which is systemic equity work in the district. And then there are other substantial categories for STEM and a few other items. All right. So in terms of other winter updates, just logistically, in terms of how we function as an organization, as a nonprofit, we had our first external audit completed over the summer and fall, which was great. It was a clean audit that didn't identify any issues with our accounting, internal processes of bookkeeping and so on. And the reason why we do this is that it makes the foundation eligible for additional funding opportunities. There are quite a few grants that you cannot apply for unless you've had an external audit, and it increases transparency. But the key thing that I wanted to bring it to attention to this group is that our auditors advised us to include Portland Empower's revenue and expenses in our monthly and annual financials going forward. We had previously, of course, been tracking their revenue and expenses, but not including them in our presentations here. We didn't include them in our annual report. They were included in our 990 tax filing, but these CPA's analysis of our Memorandum of Understanding with around fiscal sponsorship led them to believe that they should be included in that. So we're going to, from now on, include all of those, but make sure we can point out, track them separately as well. Just some other updates of things that the foundation's doing beyond fundraising. In this, it says winter updates, but our last presentation was early in October, so these are updates since then. We've been working our way through doing some PTO outreach. I have been attending, at this point, most of the elementary school PTOs, kind of sharing priorities and just talking about how the foundation mirrors what school-based PTOs do, but on a district level, in terms of fundraising, community engagement, getting parents and businesses kind of involved in the schools. And it's actually been really fruitful, and we've had some great conversations. So I wanted to let everyone know that's been happening. We're also doing some early outreach to Portland High alumni. We hope someday to do outreach to Deering and Casco Bay alums as well, but we decided that the opportunity of the 200th anniversary in 2021 was a great chance to start with Portland High. So one of our board members is Ashley Daniels, who's a senior at Portland High School, and Ashley, as a project this summer, took on creating a brief newsletter of like fun and interesting facts about Portland High School from 200 years ago from till now. I believe all of it, the school board members at the time received a copy of it by mail. So we sent that to a list of about 300 Portland High School alumni that we have in our database. Knowing that the Portland High School has been around for 200 years, that is a tiny percentage of alumni, but we don't have a strong database of alumni. So we're starting small. We sent out some surveys, we introduced ourselves, and I would be open to conversations around further alumni outreach. And then finally, I haven't had a chance to talk to this group about teacher grants this year. This is an annual program that we now call Equity and Innovation Teacher Grants. In October of this year, we awarded $51,619 worth of grants to 66 teachers, social workers, edtechs, and librarians at 17 of the schools in Portland. And then what we typically do in these quarterly presentations is we thank major donors to our campaigns, and we classify that as any donation of $1,000 or above. So again, these just go up till December 29th. We actually received quite a few major donations on the 30th and 31st of this year. So those will be in the spring update. So this is the list of individuals who donated to specific campaigns. This next list are people who gave unrestricted donations to the foundation in our annual appeal as of the 29th. Then we have a list of business donors in the last 3 months. And then finally, our list of grants. And this is a pretty substantial grant list. So I just wanted to draw attention to a couple of the bigger grants here. $15,000 of this is a grant to Portland Empowered. It's a capacity building grant for their staff. But the other $305,000 of grants were all for projects through the foundation that directly benefit students and somewhat staff in the Portland Public Schools. So $55,570 of that was funding from the Gladys Brooks Foundation to create a computer lab at Casco Bay. Casco is the only high school that didn't have a computer lab that had machines powerful enough for its students to be able to do coding and other advanced computer work. So we saw that as an equity issue and applied for funding. And those machines, I believe, are going to be delivered this week. So that's very exciting. We received $175,000, and we have written here Edtech certification support. That is with the help of Barbara Stoddard and Julia Hazel, which is basically a piece of like a build your own pipeline for our edtechs, many of whom are immigrants who are educators in their countries of origin or where they lived previously or are interested in being certified. So that grant provides a whole range of supports to help those edtechs speed up their process of becoming certified and hopefully hired. And an additional $25,000 from the Bar Foundation to do data analysis of the recruiting and hiring process for staff of color. The other major grant on here is the Brick and Beam Society of the United Way contributed $30,000 towards the mobile makerspace project that I know I've spoken about to the board before. So I believe that's it on grants. What I didn't post in here is the fact that, again, most of our donors are not major donors who give $1,000 or more. We receive hundreds of $25 and $50 donations, and we're tremendously grateful for that investment and support as well. And the last time I spoke with the board, I did share about our two specific fundraising priorities. One was that mobile makerspace. At this point, we've raised $60,000 to create and outfit that trailer. And Brooke Teller, who I believe is on the line right now, is well underway of doing that. But that amount of money means that this is really happening. And we plan to launch the mobile makerspace this summer, which is exciting. And then the second update is about the Wabanaki Film Project. This is, and again, I think you're going to hear more about this. Fiona Hopper, who is the social studies curriculum coordinator and Wabanaki studies coordinator for the district, is working with her group to film this, to plan this. It's not being filmed yet. So at this point, we've raised $52,000. We need to raise at least another $100,000, but we are in final consideration for a $100,000 grant from the W.K. Keller Kellogg Foundation. Of course, that's not guaranteed, but if we find out sometime this month, hopefully, that we receive that, that means that we will have pretty close to a fully funded project. And I believe that's it. So I'm going to stop my screen share and see if anyone has any questions about anything that I shared or anything else that the foundation's working on.
Thank you so much, Andy, for your update.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Are there questions from the board? Yes, Mr. Youssef.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, in summary. For the Edtech certification support, does that include adjusting foreign certifications or foreign degrees?
It includes, the details are being worked out, and Barbara Stoddard is here as well, but it does include potential funds to have someone help analyze foreign credentials. It includes additional funds to increase the number of courses that a staff person can be reimbursed for beyond what's in the contract that the district typically allows. So, and would provide coaching for Edtechs to help them figure out the plan of exactly what experiences, coursework, testing, fingerprinting that would need to happen to remove the final barriers. So it's meant to be comprehensive in providing supports, financial and human and time related around helping people accelerate their path.
Yeah, and I just, and I think you remember that that our budget last year included a significant amount of money to do this type of work. It also created the position that Julia Hazel is in as our coordinator of pathways. And so this is additional resources to allow Julia to really be able to step up the work at a rate that's faster and, deeper than what we were able to do. But it's for those types of things that Andy described. We're very excited and grateful for, Andy's leadership in pursuing this, and, obviously grateful to the New Schools Venture Fund for believing in the work that we're doing.
Yeah. And I would just like to share that one of the exciting things about that grant is that in addition to a substantial amount of funding, the grant places Portland Public Schools in a cohort with 15 other school districts or nonprofits around the country that are all specifically working on innovative ways to diversify school-based teaching staffs. And so it's a community of practice that's going to be sharing what they're doing, their strategies, their tools, their resources. And we think that that's going to just be a tremendous learning opportunity too for our staff to be able to connect with these folks doing similar work.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Yes, Ms. Bondo.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andy. This is really impressive and job well done. Thank you. I have a couple of questions and one recommendation. And for the Equity Innovation Teacher Grant, as the selection is done, those teachers or staff, Edtech, a social worker, they've been chosen by a pool of other staff, or they have applied for any project, or how do we do the selection for their work?
Yeah, great question. We have a volunteer committee that reviews the grants. So we publish like application guidelines and have kind of a rubric of looking at applications based on those guidelines. And it's so there's an elementary review committee and a secondary review committee. And those committees are made up of some members of the foundation's board, but also some community members and some school staff. So I think we had 8 or 9 people on each of or 6 to 9. I think it was 6 on one and 9 on the other this year. And we are always looking for new people who are interested in doing that. And I will give myself a note to invite you next year. That would be great. I know that former school board member Roberto Rodriguez participated last year. And I don't know if we had a school board member this year. I think we were supposed to have, and then someone was sick. I think it was actually supposed to be.
former board member Marnie Morioni now sits on the foundation board, but she had previously, even when she was on the board, she was a frequent participant in that.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
Okay, thank you. For the second one is for the unrestricted fund. I know the grant are more specific, focused on the project than we applied for. And can you just have an idea what did you see those unrestricted fund went exactly for the different needed? Did you see any if they were if you have to use it for any specific need, then you've been see then the district or the area been looking for. Do you have any idea where those for last year, where those unrestricted funds were really being focused?
I'm sorry, Ms. Butterfield. I'm sorry, which fund are you asking where the
unrestricted.
Oh, the unrestricted funds. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what I thought you said, and then I doubted myself. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, so in part, some piece of that goes to paying our kind of operating or administrative costs. We only pay one staff member's salary, and that's our advancement coordinator, Janine Bischoff. But most of that actually doesn't come from unrestricted donations. We have typically used unrestricted donations for those equity and innovation teacher grants. We don't usually raise the full 50 or 60,000 we distribute in grants from donations to that program or from our annual fundraiser, Spring for Teachers, which is a fundraiser for teacher grants. So often we use unrestricted funds for that. But this year, for example, one example I can think of is that the foundation paid for stipends for building-based outdoor teaching and learning liaisons. And we had raised money particularly for that program, but we were something like $5,000 short. So we used unrestricted donations to the foundation to pay for those outdoor liaisons. Okay. In recent, so it's things like that. When a request comes up from the district, I would say that and teacher grants have been the major sources or places where we direct those funds.
Okay. Thank you. So the third one is just a recommendation on the Pto Outreach. Yeah, I have been a PTO parent for years, and I really want to recommend that. I think that's something that is really needed because when I look at most, they are really interconnected on the project to fundraise, especially for their own school, for their home school. And I think the foundation efforts to try to bring them together is going to open up a really more collective effort for fundraising and building more donor base. And most of all is really getting more inclusive on the community and parent engagement. So I really push forward because I think it's going to be a really game change for parent engagement and also understanding the value of each home-based school and how we can raise more financial support for some other needs for the school. Thank you so much for thinking about that. So
you're welcome.
My last one is for the 2022. What's the focus of the foundation? Because last year you having the equity, you have the equity innovation grant, you have the opportunity gap. So for 2022, what's your focus?
Yeah, I mean our goals are typically for our fiscal year, which aligns with the school year. So the goals we introduced in kind of summer of 21 are the focus areas through this spring. And we haven't had kind of board conversations yet about shifting those starting next summer. So I would say our focus areas for fundraising continue to be our ongoing programs, which are the crisis-based programs, Families in Crisis, and the Food Fund, which I've talked about before, teacher grants, and then addressing the opportunity gap, the equity-related work, with a subcategory of that being the commitment to fund the Wabanaki Film Project, and then the mobile makerspace being the other kind of unique project. So those have been our fundraising focuses and will continue to be through this school year. We're always willing to be responsive if another need comes up, but those are kind of the areas. And then I would say Outreach and communications has been our other major area, and that's the pieces around alumni communications. It's been a commitment to sending out a monthly newsletter to everyone on our mailing list, increasing our presence in the media and social media, and just connection, the connections to PTOs, the connections to alumni, kind of just trying to listen more, share more, celebrate what's happening in the school district with our community, and just increase our footprint in the greater Portland community has been the other, I would say, major focus area of the foundation.
Thank you so much. For the grant related, are we open up to national grant or just more on the local or Maine?
Yeah, we are. That's the change, and we've been increasingly trying to seek national grants. So the $175,000 from New Schools Venture Fund they're based in Oakland, California, and they're a national foundation. And we are hoping, as I said, to get funding from the Kellogg Foundation. We've been identified as a finalist at this point, but are waiting for a final decision. And that is something we are increasingly, and we've made some efforts before and haven't been successful, but we're working in that direction.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andy.
You're welcome.
Always appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Board Member Bork, please go ahead.
Andy, this is great. Thanks for continuing to demonstrate with results how you augment our capacity in the district to deliver on our priorities. So I really appreciate that. I have one question that may actually be more for the superintendent, which is just how long have we known about the gap of the Casco Bay computer lab? I'm a little surprised.
I don't have a good answer for that. I mean, I know that, I think having a son who was in that class, there is a computer lab. It's fairly outdated. It's fairly, and so this is bringing it up to that standard.
Yeah.
And I know that this is near and dear to Miss Bondo's heart. In general, our science labs, for example, across the district, are, very much spotty, and there's not a consistent level of, support that exists for those labs. So, like so many things, like the buildings, the $40 million in repairs that that those two buildings, this building and Portland High School can expect, those are unmet budgetary needs that we have no realistic expectation that we're going to suddenly find the resources to do that. So like so many other things, we're putting patches on things as opposed to having systematically a way to be able to ensure that, every 5 years, all of our computer labs get updated.
Right.
So that's a long, bad answer to your question, which is a very legitimate question.
Thank you.
Yes, Jody, go ahead, please.
I just wanted to know a little bit, if you could tell me just briefly about the food fund and the Families in Crisis Fund.
Yeah, absolutely. Both of these have existed for a few years. The PPS Food Fund is actually run by a group called Food Fuels Learning, which in 2018 was a partnership with the Cumberland County Food Security Council, the Portland Public Schools, and a range of other food insecurity related nonprofits and individuals around here to really look at what the food insecurity issues were in the Portland Public Schools community. And they released a study, and as a result of that study, created the Food Fund, which was going to be a source of mini grants designed to address food insecurity in the Portland Public Schools. So that started in 2018 or maybe early 2019, and raised and distributed $2,000 to $4,000 a year in its first year or so. With the start of the pandemic, there was a huge increased need as the schools were struggling to figure out how to distribute food. There were things like, the federal government provided money for food, but didn't provide rain tents for the central kitchen staff to be under when they were actually giving out bag lunches and things like that. And so the Food Fund went from raising a couple $1,000s a year and distributing it via Food Fuels Learning to $20,000 to $30,000 a year over the last couple of years of emergency grants and other related projects. And the Families in Crisis Fund is has a similar story, was created several years ago and is administrated by school social workers and the family community specialists out of Multilingual, that works with families when they identify families that have pressing needs that are related to housing, utilities, medical needs, or other non-food supplies. So that's meant to be a rapid response, like one time, or we now set a once annual time for families to get up to $750 for rental relief or one of those other funds. And there's a set of criteria that, families can't be eligible for anything, for any other relief. So it's very, very much most often used by asylum seeking and other families without immigration status who aren't eligible for other benefits. And the foundation distributes actually about $60,000 or $70,000 a year since the pandemic started via our collaboration with the social workers and family community specialists. We make payments directly to creditors, not to families. So we would get an invoice or a copy of a bill for, CMP and pay, back 2 months of, CMP bill, or pay partial rent to a landlord or things like that through that fund.
Thank you very much. You guys do good work. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andy. I think as Board Member Bork said, it is so clear in these quarterly updates how much value you are adding to our capacity. So I want to, and it's truly impressive seeing how much you've accomplished in a relatively little time that you've been the executive director. So thank you so much for your incredible work. I'll just say quickly that I had the very fun pleasure of joining a Reiki PTO meeting and having Andy on the agenda and having her talk with the Reiki PTO about which I've long been involved in with my parent hat on, about the work of the foundation. And that was personally for me was just such a fun overlap. And I really appreciated the outreach and saw a lot of eyes, being opened at the recognition of the work that you do and how we can all work together more to accomplish more for our students and staff. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair Figure. Thank you all.
With that, we are going to, Mr. Superintendent, we didn't have any other consent items tonight, right?
We did not.
Okay, thank you. So now we are moving on to our board focus on educational issues. And tonight we have two separate presentations. The first is reviewing our implementation of Policy 1 initiatives. And then we will move to an update on our discipline data. So, Mr. Superintendent, the floor is yours again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first of today's updates is a look at the work we've been doing to advance our district priority around making sure that all students have access to high quality core instruction. This priority 1 is work that we've been engaged in for some time and continues to be central to the work of our academic team and schools. This presentation is an extension of a similar presentation to the board's curriculum committee at the end of November. And as we begin to prepare for our FY23 budget, we think it's critical for the board and community to have a deep understanding of the specific work and the centrality of this work to what we're trying to do as a school district. So to introduce this topic and get us started, I'd like to turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Malia Nally, joining us remote today. Malia has been the driving force behind conceiving, organizing, and managing this key work. So Malia.
Thank you, Superintendent, and Assistant Superintendent Townsend, thank you for sharing your screen so that we can have our presentation up here. Good evening, everybody. I am honored to introduce this update on our first priority, which is to strengthen Tier 1 instruction. We shared this update with the curriculum committee before the break and received feedback that this would be a valuable update for the full board. We will move through this update more quickly than we did at the committee meeting, and so when we are done, I invite committee members to add any other big insights or takeaways you all had from our deeper discussion together. Our specific aims for this evening are to review progress on the Priority 1 curriculum instructional strategies, as well as to provide a high-level view of our investments in this work. The hope is that this continues to build our shared understanding of the work and the resources required to implement our plans, which we know is helpful heading into budget season. I'm going to provide a bit of overarching context and then pass it off to my colleagues on the curriculum team, whose faces I think you now see on the screen. Specifically, I am joined this evening by Jessie Robinson, who you can give a wave. She's our Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, Carly Frederick, our middle school math coach, Priya Natarajan, our high school math coach, Fiona Hopper, our Wabanaki Studies Coordinator and Social Studies Teacher Leader, Brick Teller, our STEM Coordinator, Katie West, our Outdoor Learning Coordinator, and Courtney Graffius, our Tech Integration Coordinator. I can't say enough good things about this team of people who are all veteran educators, deep experts in their domains, and equity-oriented leaders. I'm glad you'll get to hear a brief snapshot of the work from each of them this evening. You can move to the next slide, Erin. So as a reminder, our first of 4 priorities is aligned to our achievement and equity goals. It is to strengthen Tier 1 instruction, which is our core curriculum. Our reasoning behind this priority is articulated here in our theory of action. The gist is that in order to master grade level learning, all of our students must get access to meaningful, high quality instruction that is aligned to grade level standards. The emphasis here is on making sure instruction is aligned to grade level standards, is meaningful and relevant to our students, and is coherent in terms of a progression of learning pre-K through 12. It's also on making sure everyone has access to this learning. So rather than to focus on student deficits and gaps and to then give some students different types of instruction, we want to design our core curriculum so that everyone has access to the learning with the appropriate scaffolds or supports they need. We are focused on 3 key strategies that we believe are the key levers for strengthening core instruction and making sure all kids have access to it. First, we are working to ensure that the instructional materials, often referred to as the curriculum, are standards aligned, meaningful and relevant, and aligned so that the learning builds in connected ways across grades and schools. Second, we're focused on building capacity, aka professional development, with a focus on equitable facilitation skills. One of my favorite quotes from a partner
Looks like we froze there. Does anybody know the quote? Come on, you guys.
our organization we work with is, hello?
You're back.
You're back.
Am I back?
You were about to start your quote when you froze. So if you can rewind yourself.
Yes, one of the nice things about having talking points, I can, in fact. Okay, so I was talking about our second strategy here, and so and this is the PD strategy, and what I was saying is that one of my favorite quotes is, quote, "Justice is in the details of teaching and learning," unquote.
Oh, no.
Oh, man.
We got the quote at least.
There we go.
Okay.
Maybe she can turn her video off when she comes back.
And so the task
So it looks like we've lost her. Just take us a moment to get her back.
Is everybody there?
We're here.
Did you move on without me, or should I keep going?
Miss Nolly, is it worth your turning your video off to see if that that helps?
good. Yeah. I mean, unbelievably, I've been fine all day till this moment. So
we heard your quote this time, but we lost you immediately after your quote. So we made little progress, unfortunately.
Okay, I'm almost done. So let me just speed it along. So that was the second strategy is PD. The third strategy is evaluating the systemic structures that are potential barriers to access. And an example of this is tracking, and we'll touch on that briefly in the math part of the presentation. Erin, you can move to the next slide. So the final point of context I want to make sure you all have is that in order to determine what we need in terms of high quality materials, PD or structural adjustments, we need to start from a shared vision for what we want. And the standards are one tool we use to align ourselves around what we are intending for students to learn, but they're not sufficient for establishing a common instructional vision. As such, we've built out content-based instructional visions through a collaborative structure we call vertical teams. These teams are made up of teachers, admin, coaches, and academic team members representing all grade spans in schools. These teams have worked together to study the research around evidence-based practices and to bring their own experience and expertise to articulate a common vision for what we want to see in classrooms pre-K through 12. They each include a set of guiding principles as well as practices, which we refer to as pedagogical look-fors. We also have an overarching vision that ties together the clear themes that are threaded across the content area visions. The key elements of this overarching vision are represented on this slide. But I urge you all to pop open the full document, which should be hyperlinked into the PowerPoint that's in board docs, to review the district-wide instructional vision. In addition, on the next slide, we have links to each individual vision that has been developed so far. And so I'd also encourage you to check these out. Our educators have done a brilliant job of articulating what we are striving for in our core curriculum. These visions are what we use to make choices about what instructional materials we want, what to purchase, what to design. They determine where we focus our PD time and so on. So hopefully I made it through that final bit of context setting before I'm now going to pass it over to Carly and Priya, who will start us off with an update on where we're at with our work in math.
Thanks, Malia. Hi, everyone. I just want to give you an update about what we're doing in math across the district. So as you likely know, for the past 3+ years, we've been focusing on adopting and implementing high quality problem-based curricula from pre-K to 8th grade, and Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2 at Deering, and Geometry at Casco Bay High School, and that's through illustrative math. We are, as Malia mentioned, working on deepening that implementation and strengthening our coherence across grade levels. We have math coaches for the first time in every building in the district. This year, we hired Priya Natarajan as our high school math coach, and I'm so excited to have her as a partner in supporting secondary math with me. We've had a vertical math team over the past few years. We took a little break last year. And a lot of that work that we did was looking at coherence and where we are in different grade levels. And we did a lot of research about tracking structures and have worked to break those down. And this year, Priya and I are leading a vertical math team with 6th through 12th grade educators, which includes math teachers, special educators, English language teachers, and other leadership folks. And we're focusing on coherence across secondary math. We've been digging into some local data and planning for the 8th to 9th transition, especially as students leave middle school and enter high school. And the goal is to increase access for marginalized students to grade level and upper level math classes throughout their secondary math experience. My final point there is that our professional development this year, as Malia had said, is focused on equitable facilitation in math from PK to 12. And equity in math looks like all students having access and support and extension in grade level math classes and feeling like they're capable of doing math and they belong in the math community. And there's a link there for our combined middle school and high school professional development session that we had with teachers last month. And Priya is going to talk more about that now.
Thank you, Carly. So when we say equitable facilitation, we're, as Carly mentioned, we're really talking about asking teachers to plan, do their lesson planning with some specific elements in mind. Just to give you a picture of how this looks in action, we've included our introductions and targets that we just used in our December math PD for grades 6 through 12. We worked pretty closely with the L department to really think about, something that might be really practical and useful for our teachers that they could implement immediately in their lesson planning in concert with their L colleagues as well. So in December, we did an introduction into the SIOP model. SIOP stands for Sheltered Instruction Operating Protocol, which is essentially a series of questions or prompts for teachers to think about as they're doing their regular lesson planning, not just daily lesson planning, but also weekly and unit lesson planning, to ensure that they're looking at each element of a lesson, each element of a unit, and making sure that there are scaffolds and that they're really paying attention to the barriers that might exist in that curriculum that they just might not have noticed before. We had 4 targets for that date. First of all, understanding the diversity of secondary L students in Portland Public Schools and at their school in particular. So they had a chance to look at the data for their own school and have a small group discussion with fellow teachers from their own school, using that information to plan lessons that are equitably accessible to the full range of students. This means that they're looking at, for example, students in their 10th and 11th grade Algebra 2 classroom, and really paying attention to not just the content needs of those students, but also the language needs. So that might mean looking at the directions for an assignment, looking at the level of vocabulary, looking at what scaffolds they're offering on Google Classroom that students might access if they need to. Understanding the SIOP model and using elements of that model in the lesson planning, and the model we've shared to the right. And then finally, really collaborating with L teachers to identify the strengths and the needs of their L students, and really starting to do this co-planning together so that we can most effectively offer that equitable facilitation to all of our students and work together. That's it.
Thanks, Carly and Priya. So we also wanted to share some data to show progress in student achievement in math. This is a bit challenging given that the changes in the state test has the test has changed a couple times over the course of the last 5 years, and also, of course, the pandemic. But that being said, we see some bright spots in our data since math became a focus for us 5 years ago. So what you're looking at here is a very detailed analysis that Carly and I did in 2019 when we first implemented the high quality problem-based curriculum aligned to our math vision, also known as illustrative math. And this is in middle school. And what we found in this data is that in the three strands where all the 3 middle schools taught the content. So in other words, like all 3 middle schools had taught the same units. PPS was above the state average in those content areas. So it's pretty specific data, but we think it shows some bright spots in terms of how the IM curriculum had an impact on our data. Next slide. So this one shows the last year's data after 3 years of implementation of IM in the middle school, one of these years being in hybrid learning. So just remember, we're comparing apples to oranges a bit because Maine used the Empower Me assessment in 2019, and then we didn't have the assessment in 2020, and then we switched to the NWEA data in 2021. But with all those caveats, that being said, you can see a slight uptick in achievement since 2018, 2019. And this is significant because if you look at other grade spans, you don't see that same positive change. So just wanted to, share some of that positive data that we've been seeing in the last couple of years. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about Phonics, which is one of our priorities as well this year. So this is the first year that all schools are using Phonics in all 3 grades, K through 2, and this is the 3rd year of our 3-year rollout. So it's very exciting. All students are receiving instruction related to lively letters, which is a systematic and explicit program aligned to the science of reading, as well as Teachers College Phonics, which supports students' transfer into their reading and writing. Across all schools, we're building consistency. So this means that all students receive phonics instruction for 15 to 20 minutes every day. We're also building common language and understanding around quality phonics instruction. And we're building our literacy coach toolkit. So again, we're building that coherence that Malia was talking about at the beginning. So what does this look like in action? Kids are loving phonics. So it's multimodal, meaning that students get, they learn stories about the letters. The letters have little pictures with them. There's songs, there's hand signals. One of the leaders who went into a classroom recently said that she saw a little girl say, "I love this, I love this." She was just so excited about phonics. There's a stuffy mascot for every grade. So Mabel is the elephant, Rashid is the lion, and Gus is the dragon. You can see Gus on this page. And students are really incorporating the phonics into their reading and writing and really proud of their work. So there's a little video here. If you have a minute to look, you can see a little girl during her independent reading time is using the hand signals from lively letters to help her remember the phonics, the letters themselves. So on the next page, the next slide.
Can I just say real quick for the board that we do have like the videos and all of these other hyperlinks are linked in. I just finished doing a couple of them. So you've got all of the instructional visions and the videos.
Great. Thanks, Javier.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to highlight Reiki. Reiki is in its 3rd year of implementation. So they started when we started rolling out the phonics program. There's 3 K teachers. There's 66 students in kindergarten. So roughly about 45% of students are English language learners. So the bottom row here, what's in yellow, shows that in September, only 25% of students knew their letter sounds. And within a very short amount of time, so about 8 weeks of instruction, 66% of students knew their letter sounds. So that's a huge jump in a very short amount of time. We're really excited about that. You'll also see the student to the right who's very proud of his data. Again, in September, he knew 1 letter and no sounds, but by November, he knew 2 letters and 44 sounds. So really exciting data there, and just shows that the implementation at Reiki is going really well. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about secondary literacy. So last year we developed an instructional vision that you have a link to at the beginning for pre-K to 12 literacy called Literacy for Equity. And there's a real emphasis in that around content-based literacy. So ensuring that literacy is taught in all content areas and that students increase their literacy through learning about the world, science, social studies, world language, arts. It's, across all content areas. And within that instructional vision, there's sort of 4 main parts to it. Our literacy instruction is inquiry-based. It's rigorous, so we use something called complex text, which helps students prepare for college and career. Students also explore their own identities as well as identities of others, and we call this sometimes windows and mirrors. So they see themselves reflected in literature or nonfiction texts, but they also have a window into other people's experiences and cultures and identities. And then finally, that we develop literacy skills in all domains, so speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And this year, we have a 3-part professional learning series for all 6 through 12 teachers, except for math, around how do we use complex text. So as Malia discussed, sort of access to grade level content that is relevant and engaging, that prepares for students for college and career, but also we support all students to access these texts. So it's a tall order, right? It's complex, rigorous instruction, but then also making sure that all students access that. So what does that look like in action? On the next slide, there's a great video of Caitlin LeClaire, who is the current King principal, but she used to be a social studies teacher. And there's this great video of her collaborating with her ELA teacher to deliver instruction around this book called A Long Walk to Water. That book is a book about 2 children in the Sudan and is also incredibly engaging for students as well as very complex. And students work together to understand that text. And what Caitlin does is that she provides scaffolds or supports for students to access that. So different activities to understand the vocabulary, particular questions that sort of help students understand the text as they go along. And this is really important, not just for all students, but particularly for students with special needs and our English language learners, so that all students can access that really engaging and high quality, rigorous text. Okay, so now I'm going to turn things over to Fiona.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us join you tonight. I am the social studies the social studies teacher leader and Wabanaki studies coordinator, and I lead the social studies vertical content team, which is responsible for all of the amazing work underway in social studies. And that team is composed of educators from nearly all school buildings and all grade levels. There are several building leaders also on the team, several consultants and organizational partners, and a few very dedicated parents who have been on that team for several years. There are 3 subcommittees within the social studies vertical team, and these subcommittees are the same as they were last year. The first is the Wabanaki studies team, and that group is charged with creating the first comprehensive pre-K-12 Wabanaki studies curriculum in the entire state. And some of you who've heard me present before know that in 2001, so now just over 20 years ago, a law was passed requiring Wabanaki studies to be taught in all Maine schools. And to the best of my knowledge, there is still not a school district in the state of Maine in which Wabanaki studies curriculum is fully implemented. Though there are amazing teachers and educators throughout the state doing all kinds of awesome things, many of them right here in Portland, who are on the Wabanaki Studies Curriculum Development Subcommittee. Andy, in her presentation, mentioned about the film, and I could go on and on about that, but the sort of short version is the hope that Bridget Neptune, one of the consultants working on the Wabanaki Studies curriculum work, and I hatched years ago was the idea of having a film as a central text for the Wabanaki Studies curriculum. And that serves many different purposes, but one of the primary purposes is so that Native people are able to re-explain their own history, culture, and in their own voice and in an authentic way with students in the classroom, and not have that be translated through a teacher who, in the case of the Portland schools, is likely to not be a Native person. So it also helps to expose children to contemporary Native people because there is this very unfortunate, very destructive mythology out there that there are no Native people left, particularly in New England, which of course is absolutely not the case, but it helps to break down that kind of that invisible wall in students' minds if they're seeing contemporary Native people speaking for themselves. And so that's the film project, and the fundraising is going very well. And we're hoping that if we get that large grant Andy mentioned, we'll be able to begin filming as soon as February of this year. The third grade professional development is underway. So that is the only grade level that is participating in professional development for Wabanaki Studies curriculum this year. They're kind of the guinea pig group, and they are working to do the professional development for a unit that Brooke and Katie and I have collaborated on. And that unit is called Take Me to the River, and it centers the Presumpscot River watershed. So learning about the flora and fauna and the natural history of the Presumpscot River watershed, and also the indigenous history, and then connecting that to contemporary water rights struggles in the Penobscot Nation and across the United States, including Standing Rock in the Lakota Sioux Reservation. So a lot of learning for teachers to do, and that has been going really well. Third grade teachers will implement this unit starting next year. And hopefully all elementary school teachers will receive professional development in Wabanaki Studies in the 2022-23 school year. The local Black History Group, it has partnered with the Atlantic Black Box Project, which is a local organization, and they are committed to surfacing the hidden history of New England's connection to the transatlantic slave trade. And that Meadow Dibble, who started that organization, has helped to arrange a year-long learning journey for the team. And just tonight, about a few hours ago, we got off a meeting with Dr. Christy Clark Pujara, who is a really preeminent scholar in the area of New England connection to the slave trade, and then the resistance and advocacy of Black people throughout New England. And her research is specific to Rhode Island with some connections to Maine. Our work is guided by an advisory group, and that is true of the Wabanaki Studies work as well. So both of these teams have advisors, an advisory group made up of community leaders. And it would be important for the school board to know that actually local Black history and African American studies more generally has been signed into Maine law as of, I think, about a month ago. And if you want to read more, the act is called LD 1664, an act to integrate African American studies and the history of genocide into statewide system of learning results. So this sets up Portland to be yet again a leader in the state. More on that hopefully soon. And the last subcommittee is the big picture group, who has sort of the most difficult but most complicated to explain quickly task of creating a framework for all of this other great work I was just describing to live in. Because of course, social studies is more than just Wabanaki studies and Black history. Those are critical pieces of social studies. Social studies itself comprises geography, economics, personal finance, civics, and also history as well. So history is actually just one small component of the whole huge area of social studies. So the big picture team is working to build a framework for pre-K-12 social studies and bringing some coherence and continuity to the district curriculum, which we haven't had for many years. Jesse, you can, or whoever is doing the slides could click the next one. Thank you. I'm probably not going to linger here too long, but thought I would just point out that the local Black history work and the Wabanaki studies work really centers knowledge holders from those communities. The Wabanaki studies work in particular this year we've had regular meetings with knowledge holders from Wabanaki communities, speaking to particular topics in their area of research, or if they're academics or not, or cultural knowledge, if they're cultural knowledge holders. And the curricular units are really built around the presentations from those knowledge holders. And the process for developing each of those units includes feedback from educators and also feedback from the consultants that we're working with as well. So there are a lot of layers of accountability and engagement for each of these big curriculum projects. And a lot of professional development for those educators who are on each of the subcommittees. They get a chance to learn from really just some amazing knowledge holders in this area and beyond. And I should mention that all of the curriculum work that we're working on in social studies really has an emphasis on content literacy, particularly at the elementary school level, which really allows students to develop literacy skills, not in isolation, as has been the case for some time, but to actually invite students to grow their literacy skills through engagement with really exciting and interesting content in both science and in social studies and in other areas as well. And a focus in the Wabanaki studies work in particular, but I'm sure it will be true of the Black history curriculum as well, of integrating across content areas rather than having pieces of curriculum be siloed just in social studies or just in one particular area. Slide forward, please. Thank you. Here are a couple of photos from professional development with the third grade teachers. So this was a day in August, and the third grade teachers who are in the midst of a year-long professional development series in preparation to teach the Take Me to the River unit I described earlier that focuses on the Presumpscot River watershed. That day, they started the day learning with James Francis, who is the tribal historian of the Penobscot Nation. He introduced teachers to the structure of the unit and the understanding of a river view that they need in order to teach this unit. And then later that day, a group of teachers was able to paddle down the river if they wanted to, or choose between that activity and going on a tour of the different dams along the Presumpscot, led by Michael Shaughnessy, who is the president of Friends of the Presumpscot River. So teachers really got to kind of live and engage in the kind of unit that Brooke and Katie and I have designed for students. Last slide. I think there's just one last one. Whoever's doing slides. I think the last slide has a picture of a map of the Presumpscot River watershed. I don't think there it is. And also you can see a map that teachers will use in this unit, both this beautiful watercolor map and then also a map that shows all of the different dam sites along the Presumpscot. And I also included some photos of artifacts found at River Point, which is right near the Hannaford in Falmouth. And because we are going to be able to get a set of artifact replicas of artifacts found throughout the Presumpscot River watershed so that students can really do some hands-on learning. And that will be supported by a video of Chris Sokolexis, who is Penobscot, who is the archaeologist for the Penobscot Nation. So students will get this chance to really connect history from the long history of Indigenous culture all the way up to today. Yeah, I think that's it.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me tonight. I'm Brooke Teller. I'm the science teacher leader and STEM coordinator for the district. And I'm going to give some of the updates that we've had in the world of science. I want to give a little context for the elementary updates that I'm going to give you. One of the district science priorities for the elementary is to grow our next generation science standard aligned science curriculum for our elementary students. And that means our intent is to have 3 units of science at each grade level in our elementary schools, a unit in life science, a unit in physical science, and a unit in earth space science. And that would be K through 5. Our youngest learners, our pre-K students, have science integrated in their pre-K for Me curriculum. So they are already growing scientists at that young age, and we are looking to really deepen and grow what we do at the elementary level. So the first update was that in September, we were supposed to launch some professional development on our instructional pedagogy and the life science units that have been written by teachers in the district. And when the school year began, we realized it actually would be inappropriate to roll out a brand new science initiative in the midst of the continuing pandemic experiences that teachers were having in the classroom and students were having in the classroom. So we pressed pause on that professional development to be continued next year when we come back to school. With that professional development, we were also offering early adopters a glimpse at Amplify physical science units. These are a prepared curriculum that invites students into not only the science, but as Fiona mentioned, some content-based literacy, such that these units come with a variety of texts that students engage with alongside the science learning. And so there have been, and I'll show you in another slide, a number of grade levels in each of our buildings that have decided to go ahead with the physical science, though not mandatory this year. Fiona talked a lot about the integrated third grade unit, Take Me to the River. So I will just mention that the January 26th professional development for our teachers will be hosted at Maine Audubon, and teachers will be learning about the life cycle of salmon, and they'll be learning how to raise salmon in their buildings such that every elementary school will be raising salmon to release this spring in May once the salmon eggs have hatched. I mentioned the content-based literacy. We heard from Fiona about the integration between Wabanaki studies and outdoor learning, and how that's being woven into the science units that we're going to be offering at the elementary level. And then we heard much earlier from Andy about the fundraising efforts thus far for the mobile makerspace. And the idea behind that is that it would be a trailer that would visit each of our elementary schools for 2 weeks, offering every grade level mobile makerspace experience. We want to engage students in not only maker experiences, but the design process so that they are collaborating with their classmates. They're failing forward. So their ideas might fail, but they're learning how to then work through that process and iterate their designs and create new solutions. So we are very excited about the mobile makerspace. And the one component that we would need for that is a mobile makerspace coordinator in the future. Another integration opportunity for the mobile makerspace is actually how do we bring those engaging experiences back into the building. And one way that we could do that is really leveraging our library media specialists and their ability to offer some of these maker or emerging computer science opportunities in the libraries of our elementary schools. At the middle and high school level, as we've heard, there is a vertical science team. Last year, we finalized our science vision for the district. And so the work of this year really has been to look at our scope and sequence from middle to high school so that we really can figure out where we might have some redundancies. Malia likes to talk about we want to make sure we don't have too much plate tectonics and no astronomy happening. So we're looking for gaps and redundancies. And then we're also making sure that the professional development that we are offering to our middle and high school teachers aligns with that vision and helps us move towards that vision. And so we're working with the Maine Math Science Alliance on something called storylining, which is a pedagogy that engages students with a phenomena, something that's compelling or curious that they need to figure out. And so the professional development is helping teachers shift their teaching so that they can allow the students to do the heavy lifting and make sure that they're guiding them through that process. Next slide, please. And so here are some students that are engaging in the physical science units from Amplify Science. There's some students engaging with one of the texts, and they have their science investigation notebooks with them on the floor. We see some students that are balancing some dominoes in the balancing forces third grade unit. The worksheet from the notebook having students describe in words and in diagrams what's happening with some energy transfer between coins. And finally, a very detailed model of how a mother dolphin is communicating with her calf and how the sound waves might work in the ocean. Next slide, please. In kindergarten, in one of our schools, kindergartners kept a science journal watching the decomposition of a pumpkin over time. And you can see in the final picture some of the journaling that students were doing and drawing about that pumpkin as it decomposes. The very cool thing about that exact pumpkin is that maybe a week or so later, it had opened up enough that its seeds were visible, and you can put soil on top of it, and they are already growing pumpkin plants. So students can really see the life cycle of a plant through this decomposition example. Next slide. Some of the student quotes, I'm not going to read them all, but basically students have been really engaged in the Amplify work. If you click again, Aaron, some other quotes will come up from teachers who really like that the students are assuming the role of scientists, they're experiencing phenomena and communicating their thinking in discussions and writing. So again, showing how literacy skills are being taught through these units. If you click again, please. And one more time. The non-mandatory or early adopter option for Amplify, we have 21 teachers in 8 elementary schools that have chosen to go ahead and try these units. And in fact, we have some more that are signing on now to do some more of these units in the spring. So that's been very exciting.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie West. I'm the Outdoor Learning Coordinator, and I am so happy to be here again. And you may remember in the fall that I presented 4 different phases for outdoor learning. And phase 1 was COVID response, which is getting outside for health and safety, getting teachers and students outside. And it continues to be of ongoing relevance and more necessary than we had planned on initially this year. So that's how I spent the fall, really prioritizing the responsiveness to the rising pandemic needs and wanting to really acknowledge that teachers they faced unique challenges to this particular year that they did not face last year, of longer days, increased days of in-person learning, and students not acclimated to being in these larger groups during this unusual time. So a lot of the fall was building capacity with this unique situation. And so I offered Intro to Outdoor Learning professional development for about 260 staff between September and November. And I'll cover a little bit about that in a moment. And while we're continuing phase 1, obviously, because of the situation we're in, it's important to keep planting seeds for phase 2 and beyond, which is integrating experiential education, place and project-based learning, and environmental literacy into the curriculum and Tier 1 instruction. And so what I'm doing right now with that is preparing to launch the 10 core teaching practices for building environmental literacy, which can be woven through all content areas, integrating outdoor learning into Wabanaki studies and science curriculums with Brooke and Fiona, as they've mentioned already. And I've started a listening tour of teachers and administrators and community members to really identify our current practices and what we've already done as innovation in the district in the past, as well as looking forward to potential growth. And then I've begun writing the larger vision of how outdoor learning intersects with experiential education, environmental literacy, health equity, and social justice, all the while keeping the focus on the Portland, the PPS vision, instructional vision with equity at the center. You can go to the next slide. And so what does it look like? This is just a little series of evolution. So the idea of this first slide is Tom Tellerico's class at Portland High School. He's on a walking field trip to the high water mark, and just really wanting to honor the past that teachers throughout the years have been taking their students outside and doing experiential learning. And so wanting to not forget that, but build upon it. And so we have the second picture, which is really where we are right now, the present. You'll see a group of students taking their indoor lessons outside, and they're sitting underneath a shade structure. And then the last picture is looking forward. It's engaging students by systemically integrating outdoor and experiential learning into our curriculum for the purpose of equitable outcomes for all. And here's a student working on their field journal about local fauna at a site which is just a short distance from their school grounds. Next slide. And these are some pictures of teacher professional development this fall. And I'm not going to read the quotes, but just want to say that the unexpected benefit was improved teacher well-being. I went in really thinking about, I was giving them practices and building capacity for how to be with their students in the outdoors, but teachers repeatedly kept telling me that their anxiety was reduced after the professional development, and now so that they could not only see teaching outside, but that they felt that they were grounded for the first time this year in their own, teacher style and had their legs underneath them. So what you see here is on the left, some teachers doing one of the environmental literacy practices, which is observation spots. In the middle, you have a teacher working on a phenology journal, which is the study of the cycle of seasons as relates to climate and plant and animal life. And then on the right, this is the follow-up picture to what Fiona shared. This is, you'll see Michael Shaughnessy pointing up the river to the canoeists. So this is the work of integrating outdoor learning with science and Wabanaki work. Next slide. And I wanted to just share a couple notes that I got from teachers, because I think it really expresses the power of outdoor learning, both during the pandemic as a response and looking forward. And so I did a professional development online for the pre-K teachers. And this is the note I received the next day from Anaf Kabla, who teaches at one of our partner sites, Youth and Family Outreach. My Edtech and I led the children to an open location in Deering Oaks and allowed the children to roam around, only asking that they make sure that they are not on a road and can see an adult. What you said yesterday in the professional development was very true. They did not want to run away from the group. They were propelled by the collective curiosity while we watched them interact with and explore the world around them. They were so small next to those trees, but their happiness seemed to dwarf even the tallest of oaks. We gathered after some time, and each child who had been given a paper bag to collect natural objects got to present their findings. We did a scavenger hunt and created a physical structure made of sticks that represented our time at the park. It was a wonderful day, and I oddly enough feel like I can breathe again. And then the last slide is, I was writing an email to some teachers for a winter photo to prepare for tonight, but before I could even push send, I received this energized text from Jonathan Graffius, the Rowe Elementary nature-based art teacher. He said, on the coldest day of the year so far, my students are strong and resilient. It has been the best day for behaviors, and there have been no complaints about being cold. Exclamation point. We've built our resilience and our routines, and now it's really paying off. And Jonathan has been outside, I think, every single day since the beginning of the year. So to me, this really sings of the power of that consistency and developing those routines. And that's his class over there on the right. And then I sent the email, and this morning, the photos, I thought maybe I'd get one or two photos, but they just started pouring in, and they were beautiful and inspiring and a testament to the skill of our teachers and the resilience that Jonathan spoke of. And also the power of being a part of a dynamic learning community. And I think I'll just close by saying this is one of the elements of what I love most about outdoor learning is that it offers a true possibility for a classroom not only to be a place of learning, but a real community of engaged and active learners inside a living environment. So thank you so much.
All right, and I am up next. I'm Courtney Graffius, the Technology Integration Coordinator. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share the work that I've been doing this year in the district. This is my first year in the district in this new role, and the original goal at the beginning of the year was to build on remote teaching from last year to integrate tech into our instruction and assessment and align the instructional technology with the district's academic priorities to lead to more equitable outcomes for all students. So I have been working towards that goal. The reality of the fall has also been that students are quarantining, and that's continued, and that there's been a bus driver shortage. And so I have been working on hiring, orienting and supporting remote learning liaisons, also dedicated subs for each of the buildings. And those folks work with classroom teachers and support students who are in quarantine. I've also been working on calling a bank of lessons along with Jesse Robinson and remote learning plans and resources, and have created packets for students who ride the bus in case they need to keep the learning going at home if they aren't able to get on the bus. So those are a couple of the pieces that I've been focusing on this fall and into this winter as well. The tech integration work for this year has been some backtracking and cleanup from the pandemic. For example, vetting digital tools, and that's an ongoing process to ensure that they're of high quality and connected to our instructional visions, leading to equity and meeting our student data privacy criteria, as well as that they're compatible with our infrastructure. So on the next slide is an example of that. And that this slide here is a screenshot of our catalog of applications and software that we use for teachers. So an example of a handful of the applications that are approved apps and what their use is. And so that's something that I've been pulling together and ensuring that we have available for our teachers to be able to use in person, as well as if their students are needing to quarantine and be remote. So if you could actually go back to the previous slide, I'll continue on. In my role, I work as a liaison between the IT department and as a part of the academics department, as well as with the schools. Work that I've participated in is digital citizenship work. So really with great access, now that we're one-to-one with devices, comes great responsibility. And I learned of the need for this in interviews with elementary principals, also middle and high school principals, building tech coordinators, as well as anecdotal situations that I have learned about throughout the year. And another piece that I've been working on is the computer science vertical team. And this vertical team is constructing a vision like some of the other content areas have. And so with the help of Bork, I'm leading that computer science vertical team, which is moving our vision towards reality. In doing so, we will need more programming at the elementary level by way of staffing the mobile makerspace, which Brooke referred to previously. And we have sparked interest through the library with our library media specialist leading exploration activities at elementary as well. We will work on equitable implementation at both middle schools and high schools as part of the computer science vertical team work. Supporting building technology coordinators in each of the schools for technology integration has been part of my role, and working as a conduit between building technology integration, IT, and the academics department. For example, I support these BTCs or building tech coordinators by building relationships and making myself available to them to go over and teach co-teach lessons as they are working on tech integration in their schools, and then supporting their staff. For the future, I am hoping that we can work on a technology integration vision for the district. And so that, in a nutshell, is what I have been focusing on this year.
Great. Thanks, Courtney. So hello again, everyone. I'm going to talk about formative assessments. So starting last year, we began a process to develop an assessment strategy, and this is a work in progress, but the crux of it is that we focus on assessments for learning as opposed to assessments of learning. And this means using assessments to better understand how, if students have learned what we taught them, and if not, what we will do to support them. So part of this work has asked us a couple key questions. First is, what is a quality assessment? So we think of this as things such as having high expectations and being standards aligned, having it be unbiased, assessing what teachers have taught, and then also giving teachers the tools that are really user-friendly to be able to look at assessments and make some instructional decisions based on what they're seeing. The other question that is really important is, what is the purpose of assessments? So, like I said, the primary goal is for teachers to be able to use those assessments for learning. So that we call that an instructional purpose. And so most of our assessments are classroom-based. They're aligned to their curriculum or to their scope and sequence. And it gives them a chance to sort of step back and say, again, are students learning what I taught them? And if not, what can I do to support them? The other purpose is a summative assessment which allows us to disaggregate our data and see if we're serving all of our students. And if not, what can we do to adjust our system, whether it's at a school level or at a district level, to ensure equitable outcomes for all students? This year's focus has really been on data meetings, which is really about our professional learning culture in some ways, about how do we collaborate together to look at data in service of students. And so a data meeting is really a place where you look at student work or assessment results, you notice trends, and then you take action. So these are happening at all grade spans, usually in grade level teams. People are using a variety of different assessments. It's a great opportunity for collaboration between English learner teachers, special educators, classroom-based teachers, and we're using some common protocols across the system, which allows us to collaborate across schools and talk about how the data meetings go and really sort of build our practice together. So what does this look like in action? On this slide, you'll see student work from a cool down, which is essentially one problem you give in math that you give students at the end of class to see if they learned what you taught them that day. So during a data meeting, you might sit down with your colleagues and look at this student work from a class or from a grade level, and notice what did students learn and build on those strengths? And then also, what are some common misconceptions? And it's really important to be able to look at the student work to be able to pull out those misconceptions and then be able to address it, or change your instruction a little bit the next day to make sure that all students get that key understanding before moving forward. This is sort of underscores the assessment for learning, not of learning. So we use assessment data that we get to help close gaps and increase understanding for all students as we're teaching, not sort of at the end of a unit or end of a year, but while we're moving ahead. On the next slide, you'll see what this might look like if you're giving an interim assessment or a unit assessment where you can see the data visually. And we use this in a different way. So, this is one teacher's class, and you'll see the students on the left going down and the items or the questions going across on the top. And so you can see some trends from this. So the first student seems to be understanding the concepts, right? You can see a lot of green going across. And so you can see sort of at a student level how students are doing, but you can also see trends at the classroom level. So you'll see those two items that are sort of mostly green going down. And you can say, as a teacher, that's something that I taught really well. Students really understood it. I can build on that strength moving forward. forward. And then that item at the very end might be something that students didn't understand very well. And so you might want to go back and reteach that idea or incorporate it into your lesson or unit moving forward. So again, this sort of underscores this idea of assessments for learning. They allow us to understand student thinking, to adjust along the way, and make sure that all students can succeed. So it's real, it's a real equity lever that we're excited about and have seen a lot of success with this year. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Malia to talk about health.
Thanks, Jesse. I'll stay off my video here. So very briefly, I just wanted to mention in terms of health, we have finally been able to launch the health vertical team, which had been on pause due to the pandemic. So much like the other teams, this includes teachers and also several community partners that I just wanted to shout out: Greater Portland Health, Maine Family Planning, SARSM, Through These Doors, and Students Speak Up. And so our focus this year is really on getting a sense of where we're at right now in terms of health instruction pre-K through 12 and what we want and envision for the future, so we can start to determine what we need to do in terms of curriculum materials, PD, and structures. And then the final quick thing I wanted to call out is that we have a particular focus on understanding our current approach to consent education and in order to determine what we need to do next, as well as to evaluate how our health curriculum integrates the principles of our transgender and gender expansive policy. So we'll have more updates on that in the future. We're at the nascent stages of that work, but I wanted to make sure folks understood that that was a body of work that is underway, and we're excited about where we're headed. So next, I think Gail is going to sum us up with an understanding of the resources we're currently investing in order to advance the work that we've discussed. Again, helping to build some shared foundational understanding as we move into our budget season. So Gail.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gail Cressy. I'm the Director of Title I and Academic Resource Strategy. I'm happy to be here to close out our presentation, as Malia said, with sort of the look of how we resource our investments. So this first slide is intended. We are funding the Priority 1 initiatives in the core content areas and in the other domains that you've heard about that support core content. We use a combination of local, federal, and private grant funds to address our Tier 1 core curriculum priority. And I'd like to draw your attention to the bottom two rows in particular, where you can see the per pupil allocation for each of the domains. The second to last row is the per pupil with the total combined funding across all of the sources. And then the final row is that per pupil investment with just the district operating budget. Next slide. So this view drills down into the broad funding categories. So for example, what portion of the investment for math are we spending on materials or books or online resources, then contracts and professional development, and any other contribution. The bulk of the funds, as you can see, are used for either creating or purchasing coherent, high-quality instructional materials. Contracted services and professional development funds are used to support the implementation of the curriculum and to support the development of equitable instructional practices. Next slide. And so some of the takeaways I wanted to point out from those two slides is that 60% of the funding needed to advance the Priority 1 work is grant funded. Nearly 75% of the investment is in high quality curriculum materials. Investments in math and social studies are fairly recent, especially in social studies. 95% of the funding for science is in federal or private grants, not in the local operating budget. Outdoor learning investment is funded through SRF 3 and through the foundation, as you heard from Andy. Many of the SRF 2 investments in curriculum will still be needed beyond this year. And as you heard from Andy, there's still work to be done to raise funds to further the Wabanaki curriculum. And so my grant numbers did not include sort of any recent grant applications that are still pending. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Gail. And Erin, you can take down the PowerPoint, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for such a in-depth presentation. I'm going to start with Board Member Bork. Go ahead, Board Member Bork.
Yeah, thank you. I want to take Malia's invitation to speak as the outgoing chair for this committee. I want to say what I said in our committee meeting when we went through this information. Is first of all, what a dream team of people that have just presented to us and that we have on our staff. We're incredibly lucky. And I appreciate this window in for us at the board as we get a more nuanced view of what it actually means to implement the goals and policies and philosophies and such that we discuss here at the board, and especially as it relates to equity. I think this is kind of the reality check that we need to take it from where we sit to how the work gets done. And we get an insight into what it means to go beyond the word of equity, but what does it actually mean and how do we do it? I just want to call the board's attention to the instructional vision document, which is linked. There's particularly a from and to frame of reference on the third page that illustrates what a pedagogy of voice might actually mean in practice. And it's really inspiring to me. It's in line with what I learned as when I was earning my graduate degree in education. It's what student-centered means. It's what a progressive pedagogy is. I hear echoes of John Dewey and Paulo Freire and Bell Hooks and others in this, and to know that it's been minted by our own professionals and what they know to be best practice is exciting to me. Just a lot of good things happening here. I'll just share some reports from a third grader. Is disappointment that the Wabanaki unit didn't roll out this year, but excitement that salmon's coming, and definitely no complaints this week being outdoor with the art class. And then I'll also just note when it comes to the mobile maker space, for a number of years, I produced trainings for educators in design thinking that brought together best practices from D-School, Audio, and other practitioners, including at least one PPS parent. So if you're ever looking for resources, please let me know. And I'll just call attention to Creative Reaction Lab in St. Louis. That's part of the growth edge of the design field, particularly in applying design thinking and social innovation. And they have courses and resources on equity-centered community design and a virtual course on how design thinking protects white supremacy that I recommend. And lastly, I just want to say, that budget we've dipped into in the 2 years that I've been on the board, there's been cuts, and you can see that it's a pretty efficient means to implement a lot of our big policy goals in this district. And hopefully we can keep making progress on that from where we sit and from a funding perspective. So thank you, Malia. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. And just want to echo how important this work is, how great you all are, and how this is the actualization of what we talk about in this room. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Board Member Bork. Ms. Bondo, did you want to say anything before we move on to board member questions?
Yeah, thank you. I cannot miss this opportunity. I just want to echo what my colleague Bork just mentioned as a chair of the curriculum committee last year. And I'm just so impressed and grateful for all the team for last year presentation. I just don't want to repeat myself, but I just want to comment on two pieces with the amazing vertical team for the math, science, social studies, outdoor, everything. I think when we look at on all the achievement gap, and I watched and I understood last year presentation. I look at over the years and I look at it. I say this is the key priority, I think, to try to improve the achievement gap. And I think this is the core instruction. This is everything Malia and the team, you've been working so hard last year to make it happen. that current instruction is exactly what we needed. And I think when we look at what's going on in the classroom, this is we need to think about it. How we shift our mind from the teacher, from the strategy learning, to make sure that we just define the assessment for each student and the need they have to move their learning process forward. And I think the key component for those outcome and impact is about the PD, the professional development. Our teachers are changing their mindset to their strategy learning. How they just don't see only the content, but like Priya's mentioned about the barriers, language barriers. I just give an example on the math. We have a lot of students coming from abroad who really brought a lot of high professional, high efficiency on the math contents. But when they come to the United States and they come to our public system, they're facing the language barriers. So I think that collaboration that you have just put together with the EL teachers, with the Edtech and the base teachers, is just the key success for the change that we want to see happening. I mean, how they can collaborate together to make sure that the language and the content are all combining to the assessment for each student to try. And I think when we look at the investment, this is why I need to call to our board colleague that everything is funded by the grant, and we know the grant is never last longer. You can be granted 1 year and the other year you are not granted. So what is going to happen? This is what we need to think about while we're making our investment to make sure it's really aligning to the change that we want to see happening. Otherwise, the achievement gap is going to just be higher and higher increase. We don't really put in the investment what we need to make it happen right now in the classroom. In the classroom where the teachers can see the change by making them and making those ideas and those strategy in action. This is why we can see the impact. Otherwise, it's going to be just a hard working on your side, then the implementation and to recognize and shifting the change, because most of our teachers, they've been just teaching the same ways. So how we make them changing their mind for the new first 21st century learning strategies where we can see some achievement gap be reduced. So the professional development is the key major. I cannot be more grateful to you or the team for everything you have done. And I think it's just the beginning of something. The market, the mobile market space, I think is something that I've been dreaming of. Then we can finally, hopefully, to have the 21st century science in our school system. Thank you so much. And I'm so proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Thank you for your enthusiasm and passion as well. Okay, with that, let's go to board questions, and we'll start with Ms. Russell-Better.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Malia and the stellar team. It was just really eye-opening to see the breadth of work and just the inventive and meaningful learning and the clear assessments, and just to see all of, it was just like, I want to be a student in this district to do all this, exciting learning. And I'm excited to be able to dive into and continue with this work as the policy and curriculum committee come together. I just wanted to make a quick comment and a small question I had. I just wanted to share, my second grader has been doing lively letters, and oh my goodness, I think she told me every single letter, and just like the sensory, I think maybe in describing it, use the multimodal. I didn't know that term, but just, she's just become like avid reader this year. And it's just like so exciting to have this model that they're using that's just like fun. And she just literally came home and was in the tub telling me every single like letter and the sound and the like just acting it out. So I just wanted to share that. It was really cool. I'd never heard of this curriculum. So to have it described a little bit and to have my child having used it. And then I was also thinking about a newcomer student that she was talking about in her class, just starting to learn some English words, and she was talking about them doing a lesson. And I just thought about how that sensory and being able to experience letters in that way just kind of blows my mind. So I just wanted to share. That's been really exciting to see my child learning through that. I just wanted to ask a question about the Wabanaki studies. As Mr. Bork mentioned it too, because it was my understanding, has it been a pilot this year in third grade? Maybe Fiona, could you just help me with, okay. Oh, okay.
We went back and forth about it, so I'm not surprised that you and many people are sort of a little confused about what the status is.
Yeah.
We kind of decided to just keep it professional development on the Wabanaki studies work, because you really can't find an area in which teachers have sort of a lower overall baseline knowledge, and really trying to honor the fact that teachers need time to do their own learning before they can really turn around and do right by students. And then you add in the pandemic reality, and we went for the sort of I guess you'd say like a scaled back approach, but it doesn't feel scaled back to me, because actually it's like a ton of work for teachers to have to relearn like history before turning around and teaching it to students. So I'm sorry for all the third graders who don't get to participate in that unit this year, but I think it will be better for it, for having some time for educators to engage in that information in a deep and meaningful way.
Oh, I so appreciate that, doing it right and at the right time. So, but very exciting. So that was why I wanted to know if I had missed if it was going on. So thank you so much. I think that was all I wanted to ask. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Ms. Russell-Better. Ms. Dio, did you have a question?
I just had two quick questions. With the health, what you mentioned through these doors, what were the other organizations? And then my second question was on the curriculum investment per pupil is $219, and then per pupil local funds $84 and change. Is that per year? Is that per month?
I can answer the first question and then start the second. Gail, you can help me there. But the other partner organizations who have representation on our health team right now are Greater Portland Health, Maine Family Planning, SARSM, Through These Doors, and Students Speak Up.
Okay, thank you.
And then I think the budget slide reflects this year's, the current investment across funding sources. So you see the total investment and then the investment that's being made in the local budget specifically this year. Is that right, Gail?
Yes, it's for the year. So this is our access to resources for this year. So if we take that total amount and divide it by the number of students, that's the amount we're spending per student on that curriculum area this year.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the board? Mr. Youssef.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Quick question about, thank you, Millie, and the whole team. Appreciated the work that you guys doing. The formative assessment updates, is that just the EL and special education students or the whole students?
Thank you for that question. It's really for all students, but I think what I emphasized was that using formative assessment supports all of our students, and especially our English learners and our students with special needs, to ensure that they are getting what they need in order to be successful as well. So it is for all students, but we're looking, it definitely helps students that might be a little bit, might take longer to understand a concept or are learning language. And so I would say both and. All students, but a real emphasis on students that might be farther from proficiency, and helps us understand what they need in order to get there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think I just want to appreciate the work that you guys doing. And maybe participate Jonathan's outdoor class one time. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Youssef. I have two questions and a comment. My first question is, with respect to the assessment work, I'm wondering, what are the next steps? where do you see it going from here?
Yeah, so actually, it's a timely question because today we had a chance to analyze a bunch of our literacy assessments based on our quality criteria. So we sort of defined what makes a high quality literacy assessment. And then today we took some time to step back and look at all of our literacy assessments and analyze them based on that criteria. So the idea is to have a clear analysis of all of our assessments and see where are there gaps, right? So what do our assessments cover all aspects of foundational skills in literacy, K through 2? And if not, do we need to fill something in? Or are there redundancies? And is this a chance to sort of maybe remove an assessment so that students are not over-assessed? And so, this really goes back to our coherence goal, which is, schools have been, we have some common assessments, but in large part, most schools have been using sort of their own assessments. And we found that it's really valuable to have common assessments when it's appropriate across schools so that we can see, like I said, disaggregate data and see, are students learning what we taught them? And if not, what can we do to change that? So that's the next step. It's once we've done that analysis, and we have a little bit more to go with that, do that sort of like, what do we need to add and what do we need to remove? And then have a more consistent approach next year or in future years. It's also a question of pacing, right? How much can we change next year or this spring? So that's an ongoing conversation with educators, principals, teachers, literacy coaches, et cetera.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then for Malia, I'm wondering if you can run through for me, just so I have a kind of more of a snapshot in my head, all of the vertical teams that are now meeting.
Yeah, sure. And team, help me if I forget, but our first was math. So they've been going for a few years. We have the Literacy for Equity team. We have science. We have social studies with the subcommittees that Fiona mentioned. We have computer science.
Assessment strategy.
We have assessment strategy, health. And then we were planning to launch our early childhood development team this year, but did not given the pre-K director transition. Did I get it, team? I think I did. Yeah.
I think there's a language vertical team.
Oh, thanks, Jessie. Yes. And this year, that's super important. This year we launched what Jessie said, the language vertical team. And that's a group of world language and English language learner educators, along with like other teams, administrators and coaches.
Thank you. And then my comment is just, it's the fact that 60% of the funding that is supporting this work is grant funded is alarming to me, and so it's very helpful to see the budget line items and to understand how much we're relying on grants to support this work. So that I think is very helpful context as we go into our budget season later this year. So thank you so much. If there isn't anything else from the board, thank you so much for this presentation and for all the content and certainly for all the work.
Yeah, and I also just want to extend my gratitude to you, Malia, for your leadership on this work, and to the entire team, as you've heard it referenced here as the dream team, or multiple ways. You guys are doing amazing work. This is central work for the district, and it is new work for the district at the same time, because we have not had the capacity and the resources to do this level of work until just now. And even that is with the limitations that that we wanted to just bring back to you as visibility for you today by sharing the total amount that's used for this and how much of that is grant funded. So I think it's really important for the board to understand that to do this level of work requires the level of resources that we have brought to bear on this. And without that, we will not be able to continue to make the strides that we're making. So, but thank you guys. I know it's a late night, but thanks for being here and sharing your knowledge, your passion, and your commitment.
Thanks all. Thanks, team.
Okay, I think now we're moving to our second board focus for the night, which is an update of our discipline data.
Yep. So our second focus is on our school discipline data. It's important to recall that last year we engaged in a comprehensive review and rewrite of our discipline policies. Central to that work was building a more just and restorative school climate. To remind you, the preamble to the policy JK, which you approved last May, states that, quote, schools should be safe, nurturing, participatory, and productive learning environments. This requires both clear expectations for student conduct and positive multi-tiered systems of support and interventions to meet students' social, emotional, and behavioral needs. To that end, the Portland Board of Public Education has developed this policy and its companion policy, JIC, the system-wide student of conduct, as overarching guides for stakeholders, for related board policies, and for district and building level policies and practice. Section 4 of the policy specifies that the superintendent or designee shall review disciplinary disparities apparent by race, gender, LGBTQ plus identification to the extent that identifying data and privacy allows, special education status or other relevant categories with individual building leaders at least annually, and plan with them building level responses aimed at reducing disparities. This could include policy and practice changes or professional development for individual groups. The superintendent or designee shall also share district-level disparity data with the board annually and describe the responses being planned and implemented. So tonight's presentation is designed to satisfy that requirement in the policy. And for that, Executive Director of Data and Technology, Gavin Goodall, will lead the presentation, and Assistant Superintendent Aaron Townsend and I will add commentary and be available to answer questions that you may have. So, Dr. Goodall.
Good evening. So I'll be walking you through some of the slides while Assistant Superintendent Townsend provides context and a few notes. So on the next slide, just a few notes. So we're looking at the comparison from 2019 to 2022 of suspensions from August to November. So from the start of the school year to November 30th of the relevant year. If you are looking at the x-axis, the year will be the start year instead of the end year. Usually we look at the end year because it's based on when the suspensions occurred during the year. And noticeably 2020 is absent, like Superintendent Batana mentioned, because there were so few suspensions last year. So next slide. So what you see on the left in blue is the number of in-school suspensions, and in orange, out-of-school suspensions. And so as you can see, there was an increase in out-of-school suspensions from 2018 to 2019, and then a sharp decrease this year so far as out-of-school suspensions are down by 30%. And Assistant Superintendent Townsend, you had a note on in-school suspensions, is that right?
Yes, just, the context is, as we've been establishing kind of our data practices and consistency around data tracking, in 2018-19, it was the expectations around out-of-school suspensions were more clearly articulated. So I think the number of in-school suspensions for that 2018 year is likely underreported, is not as reliable of a data point. So I don't think that significant jump from 18 to 19 2019 is reflective of an actual significant increase in the use of in-school suspension between those 2 years. But we are confident and have had protocols in place to do data audits in both 2019-20 as well as this year with the data points for those 2 years. So we see the drops occurring.
What you're saying is that probably in 2018, we were actually doing more than what is reported here.
On in-school suspension, there had been expectations around the recording of out-of-school suspensions. So I think that is a likely more accurate figure, but the in-school suspensions are likely underreported.
Thank you. And then on the next slide, we show the suspensions by grade span. So we can see that all the school suspensions have decreased at every grade span level, most noticeably at the high school level. And we see that the in-school suspensions were being reported to Assistant Superintendent Townsend's point. They were being reported at a middle school level, much more so than the high school level. And then on the next slide, you see what I've done here is shown suspensions disaggregated by race, by English language learner status, students receiving free and reduced lunch, and suspensions by SPED status. And so you'll see that the decrease is reflected in all of them, but most notably for race, we see that the trend in declining suspensions for Black students over time is continuing, and they've decreased considerably over the period from 2018 until now. So this slide, what this is showing is the reasons for suspension for out-of-school suspensions. We're excluding in-school suspensions here. And so I've tried to group them as best as I can to show that there have been decreases, but also the way that we're reporting those reasons has changed over time. You see in 2018, the school year 2018-19, a lot of suspensions were classified as other. Those have been broken out more in subsequent years. So there are fewer students overall being suspended for violence with or without physical injury. We believe that those others have been categorized have been split out to reflect more specific reasons in subsequent years. But fighting and physical aggression has gone down over the past couple of years. So there's a lot on this slide, so I'll give you a second to look through. And once you've had a chance to look through this slide, we'll take any questions that you have. This is just a quick summary of the discipline data that we've seen, the suspension data that we've seen this year as compared with the previous couple of years.
Just make an observation as board members are looking at the data and thinking through their questions. But it's interesting, my first response to the data is it's interesting to see these trends amidst what we know is a more complicated, traumatic time for our students, given the pandemic, given all the disruptions of the pandemic. So I'm viewing these data within that context, and it's certainly we're certainly moving in the right direction, particularly given that context. Board Member Bork.
Dan, thank you for this. The improvements that you're bringing to our data practices continue to be evident. So appreciate this. I think I have 3 items. One, when I look at the disaggregated data, sometimes in the past we've had it also not only by the N, but also by the percentage of that category. And I think that helps us understand the equity implications. So just perhaps in the future when we look at this that would be helpful for we're looking to understand those disparities.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I look at the suspension reasons, one thing I'm wondering is we've made this transition to a more restorative justice-based atmosphere is part of our data practice tracking. I don't know the language to use precisely, but like the inciting incident, like by these categories, and then what the outcomes are. Because like I'm curious for some of these, is there a reduction because there was other interventions used other than this tool? Like was there a greater number of drug-related incidences, but of 25, 12 resulted in out school suspension and the other 13 had other, like that helps me tell a complete story too, as we're understanding what's happening culturally. And then snarkily, as somebody that received out of school suspensions when I was in high school, I laugh when I see that skipping classes resulted in an out of school suspension because I always appreciated getting more of what I wanted. So thanks for that to my administrators many years ago. But that's just one of those things that I see that feels counterproductive, which is part of the overall examination of this practice too.
Erin, do you want to say anything about the change in practices that, because I do think, to Chair Figdor's point that this is, this one year of data, and it's in the context of, what we know is, a traumatic time in the lives of our students. And I think that it's fair to say that we have not seen fewer incidents of all of those things, maybe not skipping. I'm not sure. It appears that we've seen many more because we have suspensions in that area. But, in general, I don't think we've seen, any decrease in incidents. I think it's what we're doing is different, and we're looking, consistent with the policy. And I think that that's why we grounded, the introduction to this in the policy. Consistent with the policy is an attempt on the part of, the school community to look at alternative ways of addressing those concerns.
Yeah, I would say, I think as we've reflected on it, and some with our administrative team and, that, what comes up for me is that while the pandemic happened and there were not, virtually no discipline issues last year because of the way school was organized in such small groups and, et cetera, at the same time, we were coming out of the spring and early summer of 2020 that provided a significant reckoning for our community around race and justice that I think has had a significant impact around the mindset. So it's around practices, it's around beliefs, it's around mindset. And I think over the course of the pandemic, as we've continued to, solidify and unify in this district, in this community around a vision that's in service of racial justice, that's had an impact, right? That we're starting to see some of that impact. And certainly we need to continue to build capacity around the practices that would support that. But we're not having the question of should we be doing restorative justice work, right? We're there and we have varying stages of knowledge, understanding, capacity around how to do that work. And that's our charge now, right? As part of our kind of priority 2 strategies that we've talked about over time. De-escalation, the advisory. So I think that mindset piece is what comes up for me a lot, that as in such a challenging year, it stands out to me earlier this fall, there was an article about Coney High School and just a dramatic increase in suspensions. And, I think we're experiencing similar challenges, right? And we are taking a different approach, and that brings challenges to it. It's on the ground for teachers and administrators, it's difficult work. But it's, we believe it's the right work and need to figure out how to support people to do it in an ongoing, sustainable way.
Sorry, I'm just nodding my head yep. that all makes sense to me. And thank you for that. And that's all for me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Board Member Bork. I have a question, seeing no other hands up from other board members. which is, I know the superintendent reminded us in previewing tonight's board focus that something that we committed to is evaluating this data in terms of whether there's a disparate impact on LGBTQ plus students. And I see that we don't have any measures of that reported in this data. So I'm wondering how we are going to address that moving forward.
Gavin?
So that's a great question, because that information is not recorded in our student information system. The closest we've come to gathering that information is when we give our student survey, where it asks them if they're willing to self-identify. And of course, that completely depends on the students taking the survey, whether they wish to or not. And so unfortunately, there's no reliable way to capture that data, Chair Figdor. I am absolutely open to suggestion. I'm honestly not sure. I'd have to speak with our legal counsel on whether or not that is information we can or should try to collect. And of course, given, I mean, yeah, it would completely be self-identification.
Yeah, and I think we recognize that in passing the policy, because if you recall, the policy does speak specifically to the extent that that's available and accessible. So I think, as Gavin indicated, we do in the annual student survey, we do ask for students to identify themselves, their gender identification, and we do analyze and provide reports around that particular thing. And I mean, I don't recall the specifics of everything, but, the general sense from that is, more likely that our students who identify as LGBTQ are more likely to identify as having, fewer supportive relationships in schools, feeling more, harassed. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly what our definition is, but that it's not a great experience in some. And so I do think that that's true, but we don't have a way to sort of carry that over to discipline in our current, with our current systems.
And I believe as well, the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey that happens every other year is another valuable tool that as well asks students to self-identify in the course of that and provides a lot of perspective on, experiences with bullying, experiences of substance use. So it provides some insight for us in terms of the experience of students who identify as LGBTQ+.
I understand that there's a data challenge, but it does seem like this is a significant gap. I don't have a solution off the top of my head, but it, for the reason, for the general context, the superintendent just described, but then Kevin.
One data point that we do have, sorry, Chair, that is not part of this analysis, but will be forthcoming at some point, at least that we provide to the state, is are you the victim of bullying or harassment based on sexual preference or gender? And so I'm not sure if that's the question that you're more of an answer. So we won't be able to say, were you suspended? We could answer the question, were you suspended as a result of harassment or bullying based on gender or sexual preference? However, we can't say, we wouldn't be able to answer the question, are students being suspended based on that?
Not only that, but also not being able to say, LGBTQ plus students were more likely to be suspended for drug use or something along those lines. So we don't have the ability to do that because we don't have any identifier in our student information system for students' gender identity.
Okay, well, I will just acknowledge this gap and encourage us to continue to work to see how we can close it, because I think we have every reason to believe that our LGBTQ students are having more challenging times, and that certainly one aspect of that could or could not be how they're disciplined. So I see that as a meaningful part of our understanding this data.
Absolutely. And just going back to a point that Board Member Bork raised earlier, I will absolutely send along the data on comparison with our population statistics regarding whether or not suspensions are disproportionately impacting certain populations. But we did look at that, and there wasn't anything remarkable. I can say with regards to race, we were slightly disproportionate. So the out of school suspensions for white students was 46%, and for Black students was 34%, which we know is a bit higher. We're around, high 20%, high 20s for Black students, around 27, 28. So slightly disproportionate there, and white students are slightly underrepresented, but there certainly weren't any large causes for concern. So, but I will send along that data here shortly in the next few days.
Thank you, Gavin. And just to underscore that seeing the data in that way does really help us understand.
Absolutely.
Understand it better, and understand the trends.
I have a quick question, Chair, please.
Yes, Ms. Bondo.
Yeah, thank you.
My apologies. I did not see your hand up.
Oh, thank you. That's okay. So I think that's just a clarification for me to understand. When we talk about in-school suspension and out-of-school suspension, can I just get a clear clarification? Was when we suspend it, can you just clarify that? The suspension is done in school and out of the school. So what's the difference of both?
Essentially, the threshold is that they're removed from their regular education program for more than 50% of their day. So it might be that they're out of school, if they're out of school for more than 50%, but even within school, if they're not attending their regular schedule or classes, typically there's, that's in the office, or there's, kind of a classroom or other space that students may be in. And so the threshold is greater than half their day is spent there. It's required to be counted as a suspension.
Okay, all right, thank you. And when I look at the suspension reasons, I can say that we're going to a good direction. The trends are going to a good direction for 2021. But when I look on the bullying and harassment, I see a little more. Then we're moving from 2, 3, and I think for the years it's kind of 7 for the 2021. And when I think about the policy we just voted last year for the implementation, maybe it's out of the context, but I just want to see if there is any impact on the implementation to try to minimize the trend of the area of bullying and harassment.
Yep. Well, what I would say is I actually I noted that same data point as, Gavin shared this with us. And I actually regarded that as a success to see that number reflected there in the context of we are starting to do a more effective job at recording it. So just as we've been building expectation around our data tracking practices, that was one of the main points around bullying and harassment was a severe underreporting because of systems and documentation practices that were cumbersome and lack of clarity from us around what the expectations were. So I was actually happy to see that increase because I think that's a more true representation. I do not believe that reflects a greater amount of bullying and harassment, though that certainly has been one of the themes of the fall as kids have come back to school. So that may be contributing, but I think the numbers from the prior years just mainly reflect underreporting of those instances.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. Ms. Russell-Better, did you have questions?
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just had, could we have that last slide?
Yep.
Oh, thank you. I just had a question, Gavin. I think you mentioned this when you were talking about so in the last slide, but I just wanted clarification about the other category, because it does seem like, now we have a pretty tiny number that's in that other category. Would you just explain why do you think that has? Is it just we're categorizing them better now? And so that I just, in trying to understand the change and what that big 41, like where did that go to, since it wasn't a cat. Anyway, just trying to understand that a little bit over those couple of years.
I mean, I may, and Gavin, feel free to disagree or jump in. I think, it's hard to track from one to the other. And certainly our next phase of data cleanup is to kind of consolidate some of these reason codes so that we can better track, this over time. But as well, and I am known on the cabinet team as, wearing rose-colored glasses at times. So I do read some more optimistic news into that, which is part of what we know about the practice of suspension nationally, like the research shows, and particularly as we think about restorative justice, like the most problematic areas are when suspension is used for nonviolent behaviors, right? Disruption, disobedience, those are the places where you see the most extreme disproportionality play out because of perceptions of generally white staff, of students of color, right, and how they experience them. And so, because you also see, I think in here, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a disruption or insubordination, went from 15 down to 1. So I see in that as well that we still, for instances of physical aggression and fighting, suspension is a tool that gets used. Those are significant safety issues. We talk about that in the suspension policy. And part of what I begin to read in that, and this is obviously an early data point, we ran this data in October and we're like, wow, this looks good. Let's double check this data, rerun it again. And so we'll continue to monitor it. But I think what part of the story might be, as we track this over time, is that we are not using suspension for some of those nonviolent behaviors as frequently.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I'd even conceptualize that other really isn't violent. So that helps me understand. It was just looking like such a big blob. I couldn't understand the difference.
And sorry, the full behavior event is not shown. It's other not drug, alcohol, weapons, or violence related.
Okay, thank you. I was going to ask that too. So not drug, alcohol. Right. That's what's
not
missing.
Drug, alcohol, weapons, or violence related. Right.
Okay, thank you.
So I think it was broadly used as a catch-all category for all of those other things, like insubordinations. I mean, things like that.
Okay. No, that's really helpful to get the bigger picture. Thank you.
And it may be worth noting, and I'll leave this to Assistant Superintendent Townsend to say that, we are using other software to capture behavior data for positive based interventions. And so those are not resulting in suspensions, but are being used to think about discipline in different ways. And so few of those incidences would result in suspension now.
Yep. What Dr. Goodall is referring to is we have a number of schools aligned with the implementation of PBIS, the positive behavioral intervention systems, use SWIS. Forgive me, I don't know what SWIS stands for. School-wide
interventions and support.
Okay. Thank you, Malia, coming through. It's a team. But that's one of our kind of spring challenges is, as we heard in the curriculum conversation, establishing coherence. Certainly there's work to do on that side. So both from the categories and how we report things to which systems we're using for what, right? And we know that suspensions have to be recorded in Infinite Campus in terms of much of our federal reporting and those kinds of responsibilities, but other lesser behaviors and some of the stuff, Director Bork, that you were kind of referring to as well, are most likely tracked, in some schools really assiduously through their use of SWIS, but SWIS and IC, anyway, they're technical issues. And so that's part of our challenge is to make some determination about common systems.
Thank you.
Ms. Dio?
I had a question about statistics of police involvement. I noticed in 2018, there was one aggravated assault. In 2021, there was 4. Is there any statistics on like drug-related aggravated assaults, like police involvement?
The only specific area where, police involvement is required is in weapon-related items. We don't collect it, but the police department does, and we have access to the data of times that they intervene in school-related incidents. So I don't have that data off the top of my head, but I know that was, used frequently during the conversations about the discontinuation of the school resource officer. So in general, very few instances where, there are actual police arrests made in our schools.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dio. All right, any other, Mr. Youssef? Somehow I don't see you through the superintendent. My apologies.
One quick question. I just raised my hand. Thank you. For the most noticeable degrees of the suspension is in high schools. Does reading the data, does it show any solutions that may be effective to continue that pattern?
That's a great question. We have just begun to kind of unpack this data with folks, to just make sure it is what we thought it was. So I don't think we've identified that yet. We know that the middle schools in particular have been challenged this year. I mean, the anecdotal story is certainly middle school behaviors have been more challenging. Not that there haven't been challenging behaviors at the high schools, certainly, but kind of writ large. So it may be reflective of that, but it's a question we need to continue to unpack as we try and understand this data more.
But I think, to sort of, repeat what Mr. Townsend said earlier, I think it's, it's understanding of the negative impact of out of school time for students and, commitment across the board to look for alternative ways to address problem behaviors. I think that, there's not a specific thing that we can point to. It's like doing X, but I think in general, approaching the, what traditionally might have resulted in, having a student be out of school and instead saying, what are the lessons that we can learn from this and trying to do, the essence of restorative work. And I think that is, that's at the core what we'd like to believe is behind these decreases. But again, it's preliminary. We need to continue to look at it over the course of the year and on an ongoing basis. But I think that's the essence of it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, John.
Okay, with that, I want to again reiterate my thanks, both acknowledging the progress we've made with our data and our ability to look at and have confidence that we're able to assess where we're at and have both the data and the analysis of that data. So I want to thank in particular Dr. Goodall for that. And then in addition, just recognizing that in the context of the pandemic, we are making some progress. I know we still have a ways to go, that we're still seeing disparities in our data, but I think it's quite remarkable that we're moving in the right direction despite the incredibly challenging context that our students are experiencing in their lives, given all the disruption that and continuing disruption that they're facing. So thank you so much for this, Mr. Superintendent. I don't know if you have any concluding remarks.
I don't.
Okay. And thank you, Mr. Townsend, as well. Very much appreciate your work on this and your leadership. Okay, so now we are moving to new business, and we have 2 items here. First, we're moving to consideration and action to ratify the contract with the Benefit Association of the School Employees BASE, our BASE unit, for July 2021 to June 2023. Is there a motion?
A move.
Ms. Bondo, seconded by Ms. Russell-Better. Mr. Superintendent, would you like to speak to this motion, or is someone else
I
prepared
will
to?
get us started, and then we have others that have more in-depth understanding of the contract itself. So tonight we're asking you to ratify the contract between the district and our base unit, which represents our support staff, custodians, maintenance staff, food service, transportation, school and non-exempt central office secretaries, and computer technicians. These folks represent the backbone of our organization. While teaching and learning, as you saw earlier, is the central work of the district, a huge amount of work goes into creating the support structures that enable that teaching and learning to happen. The contract that you're being asked to ratify tonight represents the work of a committed group of individuals on both the administration and collective bargaining unit side. Those teams met for the past year and engaged in hard conversations about important issues and were able to reach the agreement before you today. The agreement, as you heard, covers the school year and next as it succeeds a 1-year extension on the last negotiated contract, which covered us from July 2017 through June of 2020. Base membership ratified the agreement on their end on December 26th. With us tonight to explain the key features of the agreement is our lead negotiator, Campbell Badger, from our law firm, Drummond Woodsum, and our second lead for negotiations, Assistant Director of Human Resources, Richard Moore, who is remote. Other members of our district team included Executive Director of Human Resources, Barb Stoddard, Principal Angie Taylor, and Board Member Adam Bork. So, Campbell, thank you for...
No, thank you for having me. So I just want to say that this was a productive set of negotiations, and I think that some very good and meaningful changes were made to the collective bargaining contract. And I think Adam would agree with me. He was part of the team. There was some, obviously in the beginning, there were some difficult conversations. But ultimately, I think through the hard work of both the school board and the base negotiating team, we came to a resolution. I think, you know, these are difficult financial times, and for a number of reasons, over the course of a series of negotiations, the product of those in terms on the wage scale was that the starting salaries for these positions were falling behind area averages. And so the board authorized the negotiating team to make a concerted effort to raise the minimum salaries. And so I think we're happy to report that the minimum salary, which used to be $13.26 for your cafeteria workers, that now is at $15 an hour. And so that's the minimum salary. So that's a substantial increase. And those increases did not carry their way all the way up the salary scale, i.e. the more the years that you had up towards the top of the scale. But nevertheless, in terms of making these positions more attractive and obviously impacting those lower on the scale, this is very meaningful for them. There was additionally a focus on your custodial classification because they had fallen behind, and also your bus drivers. And I just point those out to you because those were areas where there was quite a few vacancies, and so our hope is that the new wage scale will be able to attract and retain new employees. There's some other changes. that was made in the collective bargaining contract. Financially, I'd like to say, first of all, is we agreed to a market study in terms of analyzing the work that your secretarial staff has done or is doing, and whether that matches with the classifications that they work, and whether they're being paid comparable to area averages. And so you'll see in the back of the collective bargaining contract, there's an agreement to have a market study, and then use the results of that as the basis of successor negotiations, and that's a time save for that. And hopefully that will provide some objective criteria then that the parties can meet. And because it's, it's really, when you're negotiating, it's really hard to see what the experiences of employees are. And, and if you're not there, it's difficult to assess that. So it will be good to have some objective criteria to assess that, and we'll take care of that in the successor negotiations. The other change was, as I have mentioned to you before, there was this new law called the Earned Paid Leave, and with the help of the association, we were able to dovetail the requirements of that new law into your collective bargaining contract without an expansion of the benefits that you have. And I think that's a precedent for how to treat that, how to deal with this new law with your other bargaining units, to make sure that we're not taking away any benefits, but ensure that the benefits dovetail so we comply with the law and there's not any disputes around that. And then there were some other minor changes, which I feel would be going into the minutia, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. But I think that those are the top points that I think that and just one other thing was the ability to ask for when someone is on a leave of absence for sick, the greater ability to ask for documentation on that, because that was lacking in the current contract. But those are all very good changes for the board. I think it's a good contract for your employees. I think you should be feeling very good about what was achieved, and it was within the bargaining authority that you gave the bargaining team.
Thank you, Campbell.
And I just do want to make sure that the board knows that there is a summary. There's, obviously copies of the changes in the contract, and then also a summary that was prepared that summarizes all of those other smaller changes, language changes, and things along those lines. So if you have any questions about those, it's a good time. Both Richard and Campbell are, extremely well versed in them and would be able to.
Yeah, I'm happy to go through them, but I just thought that
I think it's up. It's there. If you have any questions about any of them, we can answer them, as opposed to going through,
No, and I just say that, when with those small issues, I rely on, Richard and the people on the ground. We consult and to make sure that those changes are not going to cause any problems. And, they were relatively minor but practical changes that made sense within the context in which they arose. And so yeah.
Terrific. Before we get to questions, I want to just acknowledge Board Member Bork for serving on the negotiating team. And I want to thank you for doing that on behalf of the board. I know it can be quite time consuming, and I really appreciate your representing us. I don't know if you have anything you want to say before we get into questions and discussion.
Campbell represented it well, and I think Javier is correct. I think the substantial things have been noted, and other things are there for you to look at. And of course, we went through an extensive process to arrive at these things, so I don't think there's a lot to nitpick at this point. But I think this is a contract that Portland wants. It moves our starting wage to $15 at a minimum, and it moves pay equity across the scale in most instances. And just with the discussions that are happening across the city and this is what Portland wants. So I'm proud of what we've done, and I'm proud of what the base negotiating team brought to the table, their truth telling, and they're staying with through the whole process to get where we got. So thank you to everybody, and thank you to Campbell.
I would can I just acknowledge the base team, because they did listen to our points of view, and they were receptive, and I, I've dealt with unions, a lot of unions, and it's not always true that they're as receptive as I found the base. I mean, there were some difficult conversations, but they really listened to us, and when we presented a concrete problem, they were more than willing to discuss that and recognize it and work with us to find a solution. So, a lot of appreciation goes to the base bargaining team.
Thank you very much. Okay, with that, let's turn to any board questions. And I'm not looking at Zoom, so, okay, here I am. Are there any questions? Campbell, you've just done too good a job.
Well, we've worked on this quite.
We have gone over quite a bit. I know we've all spent time looking at the agreement and the summary as well. So if there isn't, if there aren't questions, I'm going to move to public comment. Okay, so let's move to public comment. Or is there any public comment on our base negotiation, our agreement? I see no hands up, so I am going to close public comment and go to board discussion. Is there any board discussion?
I have a comment, Chair. No.
Ms. Bando, please go ahead.
Yes, I would like to recognize that step, because it's really important. When what I see, then the hazard paid will be end, and then the most vulnerable staff that we have been paid hourly, and I think raising down to the 15 is really making a big difference. I think, like Bork said, and that's what Portland been looking for. I think we just made it, and I'm just so proud of the team. Then we were able to recognize our staff who've been really in the front line, making a difference to our school system. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Bando. Anyone else? I'll just say then before we vote that I also very much appreciate raising the minimum that we're paying to $15 an hour, recognizing these workers, and ensuring that we're competitive with neighboring districts. I know that that's critical as we look to fill some of the many openings that we still have, or that we have during this really challenging time for employment. And so I want to just recognize all of the parties that were involved. I want to specifically thank Campbell. But our team, including Mr. Bork, but our full team, as well as the base negotiating team, really appreciate the work here to come to agreement that works for all of us. I think this is a really good endpoint. So with that, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you support ratifying the contract with the base unit for July 2021 through June 2023. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bando?
Yes.
Mr. Bork?
Yes.
Ms. Russell-Better?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Ms. Steele?
Yes.
And Chair Figdor?
Yes. So the contract is unanimously ratified with our student voting with the majority. Now we are
Chair, may I make one acknowledgement that I missed?
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Burke.
I'm sorry. I just want to acknowledge Richard Moore and his participation in this process, because there's no way that our team could have gotten through the nuances of circumstances and conversations without Richard. And I didn't mention him before, and I apologize for that. But thank you, Richard.
Thank you for that. And thank you so much, Richard. Okay, with that, we're going to do a move on to the first read on our district level advisory building committee appointments. It's just a first read, but I'm going to just run through what the appointments are. And then after the conclusion of this meeting, we're going to have a workshop where we talk about the process by which we make these appointments, which we approve the appointments. So the appointments that I'm bringing forward are appointing board member Yusuf to replace former board member Sarah Thompson on the district level building advisory committee. Board member Yusuf will also serve as the co-chair of the DABC, replacing Ms. Thompson, who was a former co-chair, along with Councillor Mark Dion. Additionally, Councillor April Fournier will replace Councillor Belinda Ray. And lastly, Sarah Thompson will will join us as a public member, replacing Brad Post, who resigned from the committee in November due to some personal reasons and that he's moving out of the state. So those are the appointments, and we will come back to them during our workshop on DABC appointments after adjournment. So now we are moving to adjourn. So just noting that our next meeting is in 2 weeks on January 18th at 6 p.m. We'll continue to meet in this blended format with most of the board here in person at Casco Bay, and the public able to join us here in person or via Zoom. And with that, we are ready to adjourn. Is there a motion to adjourn? Board Member Burke, seconded by Ms. Russell-Better. All in favor, just with a show of hands. It is unanimous. We are adjourned at 10 o'clock on the dot.